Now let's dive into the mechanics, beginning with how we level up and what that entails. First, a recap of how this works. To level up, we need to progress skills. To progress skills, we can do a variety of things. Dealing damage, taking damage, casting spells, blocking attacks, crafting, bartering, persuading, lockpicking, pickpocketing, and even walking around can give a skill progression. That last one is dependent on sneaking successfully, but you get the point. These actions give us XP, and once we have enough, we can level up and use a skill point to unlock skill perks, typically in the skill trees we are using giving our current build. Once a skill is maxed out, it can be reset via the legendary system, refunding skill points and refreshing the skill to be leveled up again without resetting player level. This allows endless leveling of particular skills we prefer to use, instead of having to spread our skills out once our favorite skill tree is used up for XP. We also gain a small 10-point upgrade to health, magicka, or stamina per level, depending on our choice, not to mention the carry weight increase when leveling stamina. The trick to this system comes down to what we choose to do and when we do it. If we want some quick skill ups to help us get that almost full XP bar over the edge, we can level up a low stat to get us there, either through using it or training. It doesn't have to be a stat we use often or at all. As long as it's a skill progressing, we'll get XP for it. The XP also scales up as we progress to higher skill levels, so sometimes working on a higher skill may be more beneficial for leveling up than a lower one. We also must consider if it's worth it to work on a skill we don't use often, or to focus on one skill specifically to get a particular perk we'd like to have. It may take longer, but the progression of the skill will help unlock greater rewards in the tree. It all comes down to player decisions and managing what skills will be most beneficial to focus on at any given time. If we need better armor, we'll focus smithing until we move to a higher tier of armor. If we want better use of our destruction spells, we'll focus that skill in combat until we unlock lower costs and additional effects applied to our spells. If we want better deals at vendors, we'll need to barter for goods to buy and sell to build our speech skill up. There's also the timing of when we choose to level up, as it's not automatic. We can continue to gain XP even without triggering the level up, and XP stacks continuously. This can be advantageous for a multitude of reasons. We gain full health, magicka, and stamina once we trigger the level up, so it can be a backup restore should we need it in a pinch. We can also take advantage of trainers with us, as we have a max of 5 training skills per level. We simply train 5 times, open our level up screen to level up, then we train another 5 times. This helps with quickly leveling up a stat if we have the coin and a handy level up available. We automatically level up to wherever our XP is once we choose to level up, so it is possible to level up several times in one trigger. This means we can't maximize every level for training boosts, but this usually only happens at early levels, so most of us won't see this issue after level 10 or so. As I said, all of this comes down to player decisions. This helps to keep the player in control of their own progression, and helps them to diversify their build as they see fit. The beauty of this level up system is that it is extremely freeform in the way it divvies out resources. If we want to level up several things at once, we can do so, and it's totally viable. If we want to only play with a few skills and want to level them up over and over, we can do that through the legendary system, and that is totally viable as well. We can use skills to level up for points we'll use in totally different skill trees if we want, and we can place upgrades wherever we see fit. We also get to choose where we want to level things up, as we can reserve leveling up, stat boosts, and skill points. The leveling up and stat boosts must be done once triggered, but we can sit on skill points for as long as we want. There are very few restrictions as far as where resources need to go to craft a build or progress through a skill tree. This allows for a multitude of build options to pop up during a player's time with the game. We can be a traditional mage, warrior, or thief, or we can mix and match skills depending on what we want to do. Do you want to be a heavily armored tank that blocks damage and chucks fireballs at people? Well, you can be that. Do you want to be a sneaky devil that employs distractions, persuasion, and invisibility when sneaking around, but will switch to a two-handed warhammer when the going gets rough? Well, you can be that too. Do you want to raise an army of Atronachs to fight for you, while you snipe targets with a bow? Well, you can do that too. Do you want to roam the world with a follower and support them through healing and buffing their stats? You can do that too. There are several options available across the spectrum of combinations that can be made in the game. Sure, some may be more beneficial than others, but the freedom to combine skills in any way we want keeps the game fresh and allows us to play at our own pace when it comes to progressing our skills and refining our build. We can also change builds at any time, although the skill progression and skill points will be fixed until you legendary a skill or have the Dragonborn DLC finale unlocked, which allows for a reset of a skill through spending a Dragon Soul. No matter what, the options are always open. Now let's shift gears and talk about what changes when we level up. Regardless of skill progression, we gain a boost to our health, magicka, or stamina per level. As we level up, it would be beneficial to increase the stats that are relevant to our build. For example, tank builds using shields and heavy armor will prefer stamina and health for extra carry weight, shield block, power attacks, and the additional health to help them outlast their opponents. On the other hand, mages will prefer magicka for additional spellcasts, and health given mages typically wear little to no armor. For thieves, they may forsake health and magicka entirely, as stamina will increase their carry weight, allowing them to steal more and more with each level. Those are just the basic builds, so imagine the split as they pertain to specialty builds like the ones I mentioned before. The game also gets harder and more rewarding as we level up, and this pertains to the game's attempt to balance itself as the player grows stronger. NPCs will scale with you up to predefined caps, with notable examples including regular bandits that move up to bandit highwaymen, and basic dragons up to ancient dragons. This basically shows the game is trying to throw enemies at you that are within your level range, although you can always outlevel most enemies in the game given enough time and know-how. Leveling up also increases the chances of finding better loot, with much of the loot in the game generated based on your level. This leveled loot will also reach a cap, so the loot will taper off in value once you've gotten your 5th Daedric Gauntlet in the game. It's not to say you won't find great stuff lying around at higher levels, but it will start to become common to get higher tier gear, potions, and so on once you hit certain level caps for random loot, and by then, you should be well off anyway. The problem with the way this level scaling works is that it becomes inconsistent over time. For example, a level 20 player could be level 20 because they worked on their smithing and enchanting skills to make some fancy armor and weapons for themselves, but their combat skills are lackluster, so their gear is good, but they are weaker than they should theoretically be by level 20, making combat more troublesome than it would typically be. Likewise, if a player really enjoys using a special set of gear that's on the lower tier of items, this will cause their combat effectiveness to be static and gradually become worse compared to the scaling enemies and encounters. These affect the way enemies and encounters are scaled, with some areas having hard caps in the lower level range, while others start off in a high range and never change. A notable rule that the game tends to follow is the higher the elevation, the higher the enemy level will be. This isn't always the case, but it tends to ring true most of the time. With this in mind, you can see why dealing with some enemies early on can become an issue. There are several examples of enemies that are simply too strong to face at certain points, which undermines some of the freedom of the game when certain areas spike up in difficulty just because the devs said so. This also creates a reverse effect on lower leveled areas where they become trivial and never become a challenge again, even with enemies scaling and respawning. It's an issue of consistency, and the game has a significant issue with scaling everything properly. This is part of the reason why playing the game can be uneven in terms of the difficulty and pacing. Certain questlines will have encounters that might be leveled in the 20 to 30 range, but you're level 87 and you simply haven't done the quest yet, making the encounter a joke when you waltz in and start shredding through the opposition. Granted, some people really enjoy slaughtering weaker NPCs after leveling up, myself included, so this comes down to a perspective thing on how hard these encounters should ultimately be. Regardless of opinion though, the scaling is inconsistent throughout the content of the game, making the challenge and experience inconsistent as well. Getting back to the leveling discussion, the leveling system is built primarily to foster options for the player, and a lazy attempt was made to auto-balance things afterward. As you can tell, I don't believe it works very well when you break it down. Hard level caps and ranges for encounters can still be engaging if other elements are added to spice it up. Take the Souls games. Yeah, you can outlevel some encounters and enemies with enough time, but they can still fight in a unique way that can maintain a challenge or interesting dynamic even if you're technically overleveled. It's about the way the total package works, not just arbitrary number differences. One roundabout way Skyrim allows us to deal with scaling issues, at least in the upward direction, is to use the myriad of ways we can level up skills. We'll go over some of these details as we get through other topics, but there are a lot of exploits that can easily lead to a few dozen levels or more if you know what to do. That's sort of a double-edged sword for Skyrim. The scaling system and its balancing is all over the place, and objectively problematic, but it can be fun to see the game be completely broken or ridiculously hard depending on who scales higher, the player or the game. But with that, let's move over to the skills themselves. We'll begin the skill discussion by going over the various mage skills we can use. We'll start with Destruction. This skill tree is all about killing stuff with magic and requires us to make active moves to fight enemies. The entire tree is built on buffing our attacks and reducing the price of each spell. We can buff damage dealt by up to 50% per type, and each of them has a unique effect we can unlock. When enemies are at low health, fire damage causes them to flee, frost damage can paralyze them, and shock can disintegrate them. We have the overcharging of spells when two-handing them to increase their power and boost their stagger chance. We also get a buff for the placement of runes, making traps that much more useful when we can place them 5 times farther away. When it comes to the spells we can use, we have several that tier up as we go. For example, the Novice Flame spell is a cheap spell to cast that spews continuous flames, but is relatively weak. When we make it up to Firebolt, Fireball, and Incinerate, they move to projectiles that cause quite a lot of damage, but also cost much more magicka per cast. The Frost and Shock variants also have similar scaling between their Novice spells, and the others we unlock at Apprentice, Adept, Expert, and Master levels. We also have defensive spells like runes that lay explosives on the ground that erupt with their respective damage types, or cloaks that surround the player with that damage type, adding passive damage to anyone within range. We also have master spells like Firestorm that act as a massive AoE explosion around the player. Each damage type also impacts combat in some way. Fire damage lingers after the target is hit, adding a little extra damage over time, and deals bonus damage to certain types of enemies, like Draugr, Trolls, and others. Frost damage slows the target and drains stamina with each hit, and Shock depletes the target's magicka. These variations help to overcome different challenges at different points, like chucking Frost against a warrior to slow them down, or shocking a mage to reduce their available magicka pool. As far as playing with destruction magic goes, this tree is blatantly overpowered against most enemies that aren't mages themselves. This leads to a lot of magic combat with this tree to be a simple, spam them with spells until they die. This does become a bit boring when it comes down to chucking the same spell at someone over and over until they die. Sure, the dynamic changes a bit if the opponent is also a mage, and is using defensive spells like wards, or if the enemy is weak or resistant to certain types of spells. Those elements change what we fight with, but the strategy largely remains the same. Just spam the enemy with the spell they're weakest to, and you'll usually win. This is one of the greatest drawbacks to using destruction magic. It's so overpowered that the dynamics of combat often come down to your magicka pool being large enough to spam the enemies with spells until they're all gone. If that's not the case, then you wait and regenerate, or you use a weapon of some sort. The dynamics of this tree tend to simplify over time since we just unlock stronger versions of other spells and reduce their costs. There's not much else to the tree outside of variability and intensity in the ways we burn, freeze, or shock the enemy to death. As stated earlier, the strategy largely remains the same of spamming the right spells over and over until we win. Sure, this tree can become overpowered and being overpowered can be fun, but it does cause combat to be more of a nuisance than a challenge when you can vaporize your opponents in seconds. Next is Restoration. This tree is all about support and recovery. As you can see, it follows a similar path for discounting spell costs as we unlock greater spells. It also adds passive effects like magicka regeneration boosts, a chance to heal automatically when near death once per day, boosts all magic effects against the undead, and we get some utility functions and healing spells also restoring stamina, and wards recharging magicka when hit by spells. When we get to the spells themselves, we see a tier list of a few different types of spells. Healing ourselves, healing others, using wards for defense, and torturing the undead, among a few other random spells. As you can imagine, most of these spells are used when we're in trouble, as we won't need to heal anyone unless significant damage is taken to begin with. We also see defensive capabilities when it comes to wards being particularly useful against other magic users, as well as the various spells that cause undead to flee. The ward's usefulness is self-evident, but the spells against the undead tend to go unused in my experience, as causing targets to run away from you usually makes them harder to attack than when they are charging you. Plus, destruction spells of the fire variety tend to take the undead down without an issue, so waiting for the undead to be around to use these niche spells that make them run away or don't do a lot of damage seems like a waste of magicka when we can blast them with destruction spells that will do way more damage to them and kill them faster. Restoration magic is usually focused on self-preservation. It's a common means of healing oneself no matter what build you're running with, as it's the cheapest and easiest resource to use for health restoration. It's also easy to use if you don't use magicka with your build. Many warrior variants will use the restoration spells in between blocking and bashing their way to victory. Thief variants will usually do the same if they are unlucky enough to be found out. It's a cheap way to save on potions, and if the magicka runs out for these builds, they don't use it anyway, so they'll fall back on potions, and by then, most encounters will be nearly over unless something drastic is happening. One of the drawbacks with Restoration is that it is so simple as a tree. It primarily deals with healing, so you'll usually use your strongest spell to heal yourself, and then go back to whatever build you usually run with for combat. This means Restoration is usually an afterthought unless you're using the undead-specific spells, or healing a companion, or using wards. Even then, those only work on select groups of enemies most of the time, so builds using these features aren't viable beyond their niches. Granted, Restoration is built as the healing tree, and it doesn't need to have any crazy damage spells within it. That's fine with me. I just think some of the spells were included just to add more stuff into the game, no matter how rarely they would be used. If we take out all the undead spells that don't affect the player, of which there are 12, and we take out the remaining healing effects for others, of which there are 2, the total spell count drops from 23 to 9. Of those 9, we have 5 that heal us in some way, 3 are wards, and 1 is a poison rune. My point with this is that over half of the spells in the healing tree don't heal, and are primarily used to fight undead, when we already have tons of other and often better ways to fight them. What I would have done is expand the healing options available. We have active healing, like with fast healing, but we could introduce passive healing that is castable and regenerates health over time, even when we don't have the spell equipped. This would be similar to different healing effects in many other RPGs, where we have the spell that heals a decent amount once, but we also have spells that heal a small amount repeatedly over time. We could even scale these up as we progress the tree. Have each version deal a percentage of the flat cast spells, but over a longer period of time. Take Close Wounds. It heals for 100 points in a single cast. Have another spell called something like Wound Care that heals 20 points every 2 seconds over 30 seconds. With this simple addition, we've changed the way healing can be used in combat in an interesting way, and have added another 4 to 5 spells that can be added to the spell list. We keep it healing focused, we keep it scaling, and we add new dynamics to healing with several over-time healing effects. But instead, we make undead run around a lot. Big whoop. The healing aspect of the restoration tree absolutely does what it needs to, and works well given the different ways we can heal ourselves and others. I just think there was an opportunity to expand it even more toward healing, instead of giving a bunch of niche spells that only work in specific encounters. Next is Alteration. This tree is the utility tree of magic. This tree offers several passive effects that aid in general magic combat, as well as other niche things. As with other trees, we scale up our effectiveness with alteration spells. We also have several passive bonuses in this tree, such as blocking up to 30% of a spell's effects, absorbing 30% of the magicka of a spell that hits us, increasing the duration of alteration spells, and increasing our protective spell's strength by up to 3 times when we aren't wearing armor. The spells of this tree vary widely. Some spells help us detect NPCs, some produce lights that stick to their environment, some increase our armor, some immobilize targets. One allows us to transmute ore from iron to silver, and then silver to gold. Another allows us to use telekinesis to pull objects to us. One allows us to breathe underwater. Another lets us convert health to magicka, and one allows us to ignore 80% of all physical damage for 30 seconds. Suffice it to say, this tree is interesting. This tree can help a wide variety of players and their builds based on what they need. A tank can use ebony flesh to increase their armor value even more, and transmute basic ores into valuable materials for jewelry, effectively increasing the speed of blacksmithing skill-ups. Thieves can use telekinesis to grab objects from across the room, and detect life to find where their prey waits to be pickpocketed. Mages can use a myriad of the passive effects to buff their defenses in combat, and increase their already low armor along with converting health to magicka in a pinch. Paralyzing targets individually or en masse can also be beneficial for a variety of character types. This tree is one of the easiest trees to farm once you know what you're doing as well. Most of these spells are passive, so they can be done anywhere without angering anyone. Mage Light is a cheap spell that gives XP based on distance thrown. Telekinesis can be glitched by fast traveling while holding something with the spell when traveling. Detecting life in a city nets increased XP based on the number of people present, and there are other ways on top of this. Alteration as a tree is absolutely broken for grinding purposes, and that is one of the biggest issues with it. The utility of its abilities varies from mundane, Mage Light, to good, Ebony Flesh, to outright incredible, Dragon Hide, Transmute, and Equilibrium. The spells are great, but the XP grind is absolutely imbalanced beyond repair. This tree has an incredibly wide range of utility uses across most, if not all, builds of the game. On top of that, it's incredibly easy to farm for XP, skill points, and levels. This tree is insane with that in mind, and I'm surprised the devs never tried to balance it given how exploitable it is. Maybe they know and think it's cool to have something this broken in the game. As far as this tree goes, it is one of the easiest to use for its multitude of applications and bonuses, either for the passive effects in the tree itself, the spells that add some utility function for various builds, or exploiting the XP gain. In any case, this tree has earned its place as the greatest XP grinder of them all, on top of some very handy spells to boot. Next is Illusion. This is the trickster tree of the group. This tree follows a similar format to the others as far as progression and overcharging. It also includes extra boosts to many of the spell types in the tree, like increasing the level caps for certain spells to be effective against a target. The tree is largely just a long line of "it's illusion, but better now." This makes progressing in the tree a little underwhelming by comparison to the others, as a lot of these perks just make illusion spells better on a number basis, not in the dynamics of how it works. Quiet Casting and Master of the Mind are notable exceptions, but all the rest have some basic boosts they add, mostly by increasing the level of the targets we can affect. When it comes to the spells in this tree, the majority affect other NPCs in one of many weird ways. We can cause them to attack anything nearby, we can buff their stats for a limited time, we can pacify enemies, we can make them flee for their lives, and we get a few utility spells on top of that. Clairvoyance shows the path to the current quest goal, Muffle makes us move more quietly for 3 minutes, and we can become invisible for 30 seconds. That's it for illusion spells, and I'd be lying if I said I was impressed. The biggest problem with this tree is that it's largely the same spells being used over and over, and their numerical values just go up over time. Yes, it's helpful to buff allies, cause enemies to run in fear, pacify them, or start a fight between them, but that gets old when that's the majority of what the spells do. It's largely a tree that changes the way NPCs work in the same repetitive ways, but it just slowly raises the cap on who we can affect with the spells. If anything, the utility spells are more interesting and helpful given what they do. Finding the path to the quest goal can be helpful when we aren't sure where to go. Going invisible can be incredibly helpful in different scenarios for obvious reasons. Muffling our sound also helps every sneaky thing out there to do what they do best. Muffle also works as an easy XP farm, as you can dual cast it, wait 1 in-game hour, then repeat this process to your heart's content for easy XP farming. Well, assuming Alteration hasn't panned out for you. A major disappointment with this tree is the possibilities that were never realized. Imagine if we unlocked spells that created illusions of various other NPCs in the game to serve as distractions, either for combat purposes or simply distracting an NPC while we steal their stuff. What if we could create a copy of an NPC we can see, and we could convince them to speak to other NPCs into doing something? Imagine we spawn a ghost and it causes the NPCs to run away from it while we explore an area. That would make things interesting to copy an NPC for 30 seconds or so to cause some confusion and mischief. It'd be a lot more dynamic and interesting than, do you want to make them run away, fight each other, or chill out for the 50th time? Yes, mechanically, what I suggested isn't too far off from what happens in the game now, but the execution could have been so much better than casting a spell that does one of several repetitive things depending on its type. The ideas in this tree aren't bad, they're just basic and repetitive when you get down to it. The dynamic doesn't change as we progress the tree beyond successfully affecting NPCs at higher levels. The potential here is what makes it lackluster, and it's a shame that they couldn't think of more spell ideas for the main tree beyond Fear, Fight, and Calm being used over and over. Again, the random one-off spells are more interesting and useful to use than the main content of the tree. We'll wrap up the Mage Skills section with Conjuration. Conjuration is the summoning tree of the game. Like other magic skill trees, we get the reduction in costs of Conjuration spells and the dual casting buff to make them stronger. We also get the ability to buff our bound weapons to do more damage, soul trap enemies, banish summoned creatures, and turned raised ones. This tree also specializes in summoning, either in reanimating the dead or summoning Atronachs to fight for us, and we can buff them with more health, greater summoning distance from us, increase their duration, make them stronger, and we can have 2 summons at once when we master the tree. Of all the spells available for this tree, we have a few bound weapon variants, several summoning spells for Atronachs and the dead, a few spells to banish Daedra, and a couple utility spells. We can summon a few one-handed weapons, a bow, and a two-handed weapon to allow us to use magic while also working on weapon skills. We can summon several variations of fire, frost, and shock Atronachs that affect enemies based on their type in the usual manner, as well as some unique summons from the base game like Dremora, and enemies from the Dawnguard and Dragonborn DLCs like Mistmen and Ashspawn. We can also resurrect the dead to do our bidding as an added bonus. Then we have utility spells that can aid us in turning other summons to our control, banishing Daedric enemies, soul-trapping targets for soul gems, and a few unique spells that relate to quests we complete, like summoning Arvak from the Soul Cairn. This tree is very useful for any magic user, as the summons can serve as distractions, additional damage sources, and disposable damage sponges, while the bound weapons effectively add weapons we can summon that fill soul gems for us. These elements help to make the tree versatile in what it can do, as well as add some worthwhile abilities for mages or those that need a way to capture souls. Soul Trap also acts as an effect we can apply to enemies and then fight them with other means to fill a soul gem. Yes, we have to defeat them within the time limit, but it usually works unless combat gets dragged out for some reason. The summons are the greatest advantage this tree has over others, as the summons grow in strength as we progress the tree, and are relatively cheap to resummon once they've died. This effectively creates an NPC that will fight and die for us while we do whatever we want, and they are easy to replace. We also have the added benefit of permanent summons once we reach the highest level of Conjuration Mastery. Having a permanent NPC that does your bidding can be quite helpful in a pinch, and serves as fodder against stronger enemies when you need some bodies to throw at something tough. The bound weapons also act as a workaround to one of the main problems with magic users: they can run out of magicka. When this happens, players will typically fall back on weapons they've picked up, but conjurers will have weapons that get their skills up while also soul trapping and don't take up any carry weight or require anything to charge their soul trapping functions. The bound weapons act as a cheaper alternative to some weapons and don't require anything but magicka to use and maintain. This tree is a very helpful one, but also becomes the most chaotic as we have two summons doing their thing, on top of enemies, on top of the player themselves. This can lead to some encounters becoming overcrowded. Group combat becomes more manageable, but also harder to track when two summons are doing whatever while you are trying to strategize how to defeat the enemies. This can also lead to collateral damage, as some of the summons cause AoE damage that can damage other friendly NPCs, which can lead to bounties and other NPC-related concerns. It's a fun skill with several options for summoning, but I'd add a word of caution since the summons can sometimes screw things up if you aren't careful. Now we'll be getting into the warrior skills, starting with two-handed. Two-handed is the tree where something gets the mead beaten out of it. The tree itself buffs two-handed attacks in different ways. All two-handed attacks can have the damage doubled. Specific weapon types gain special effects like increased chances of critical damage for greatswords, bleeding damage for battle axes, and warhammers ignore up to 75% of armor. We also reduce stamina costs for power attacks, and they gain bonuses for attacks done in different directions. Standing power attacks have a 25% chance to decapitate enemies, sprinting does double critical damage, sideways power attacks hit all targets in front of us, and backwards power attacks have a 25% chance to paralyze. These perks are largely reflective of the way melee combat works as a whole. It's just a whacking game at the end of the day, so the player whacking harder is a good thing. Two-handed is especially whackalicious because of the nature of this type of combat. We completely dedicate ourselves when using two-handed weapons, as in we can't have a shield or a spell at the ready in the other hand, so the game does its best to augment the damage we deal to be as massive as possible. This is a good thing to help our skull-cracking prowess, but this also leads to this variety of combat to be particularly repetitive, as this tree makes smacking things easier, and nothing changes besides the way the enemy gets smacked. Yes, we get some interesting effects because of directional power attacks, but those just slightly augment what was already there to begin with. We're bludgeoning something until it dies, so paralyzing our target, hitting multiple of them, or decapitating them doesn't really add anything new to the combat besides we whack easier, we whack multiple targets, or we get an animation where we win early. It doesn't expand the mechanics of two-handed combat much when most of these skills just make us better at it in a numerical way, with a chance for something interesting to happen. This leads to greater criticism of melee combat in general. Melee combat is very basic and oftentimes one-dimensional. You can play the game tactically if you use shields to block and stun opponents, and spells can create some interesting combos with weapons, but you can also wail away and chug potions if you have them and need them. This leads to melee combat being boring once we realize the best thing to do is slap an enemy down as fast as possible and heal afterwards. The slapping may change depending on the weapon type and perks unlocked, but the result is the same. Spam your attack button until their health bar reaches 0. Unless you're dealing with a particularly powerful enemy, a unique enemy, you're underleveled, or on a higher difficulty, this will be the fastest way to deal with a threat. Changing the numbers and added effects to melee strikes doesn't really change this aspect of melee combat, and that leads to skills like two-handed being very simple by comparison to other skills we've already been over, and will cover later. Overall, two-handed suffers from the melee problem of the game. This combat devolves into a slap fight where we see if we can kill the enemy before we need to heal. We may be able to decapitate them, paralyze them, or hit multiple of them, but the process is the same. Hit attack button, hit power attack button, repeat over and over until enemy is killed or health is needed. It's a very simple process, and it's a shame this wasn't developed beyond you whacked before, but now you'll whack better, with a chance of neat thing happening. Seriously, the melee combat is very underwhelming in the game, and is arguably the least defined combat system in Skyrim as a whole, especially when two-handing. The two-handing skill is extremely one-note as a result, and one of the most boring skills to advance. Now let's get to the other melee skill, one-handed. This tree shares many similarities to two-handed, with the only real differences being the dual-wielding attack speed boost and the bonus damage to dual-wielding. Seriously, the trees are almost identical besides dual-wielding perks and the lack of a multi-target attack for one-handed. As a result, most of my criticisms for two-handed apply here regarding how one-dimensional the tree is when it comes to boosting our slashes and thwacks in numerical but not many tactical ways. The saving grace for one-handed is that it can be paired with something else in the other hand. Having a shield at the ready can help for defensive reasons that we'll get into soon once we get to the block skill. Spells have a variety of uses that we've already been over. So, take any spell I've mentioned that sounded useful, like healing or chain lightning or paralyze or conjure flame atronach, and then add that to a one-handed weapon of your choice as an offhand effect. If nothing else, we can simply have another weapon in the other hand so we can slice and dice our way to victory. It's very helpful when we can stack other skills on top of one-handed. Healing while one-handed is an easy way to ensure survival, and the same goes for a shield. Shields can also stun opponents and interrupt attacks, as we'll go over soon. Other spells can help depending on what you're dealing with as well. If fighting a mage, a ward or shock spell will be helpful in your offhand. If fighting another warrior, frost can deplete their stamina to use against you. These things don't change my criticisms of one-handed in any way. If we take one-handed as a skill in isolation, it has the same repetitive and one-dimensional attack pattern as two-handed, with minor chances of decapitation and paralyzing a foe. It's the additional effects we can stack on top of one-handed that help to redeem it in some ways, but that's just by virtue of our character having, two workable hands. As the skill stands now, it's incredibly simple and underwhelming on its own, but is redeemed by not taking up both hands when in use. Next is Heavy Armor. This is all about buffing that heavy metal we're wearing. This skill tree includes a basic buff to our armor rating from Heavy Armor, as well as several utility effects. Unarmed attacks with heavy gauntlets deal extra damage per their armor rating. We take half damage from falling while wearing all heavy armor. Heavy armor will weigh nothing and won't slow us down when worn. We get armor bonuses based on wearing all heavy armor and if it's a matching set. We have a lower chance of being staggered, and we have a small chance to reflect melee damage back to an enemy when wearing all heavy armor. In contrast to the melee trees, this one has many useful effects that help with using the armor in a variety of ways beyond its basic function of protecting us from harm. Having your armor weigh nothing when equipped will open more carry weight when adventuring, allowing more loot for the coffers. This can exceed upwards of 90 weight points when we get to the heavier armor sets, including a shield. Not sure why the shield counts as heavy armor, but it counts, so good for us. The reactive effect of reflecting damage is a great defensive tool when fighting, as we don't have to do anything besides wear heavy armor for it to work. Granted, it would take a while to kill an enemy that's attacking us with that damage, but it's a little effect that aids in defense when our armor will reflect damage back on foes. The other bonuses to unarmed combat and halving fall damage also lead to interesting results when roaming the world and fighting enemies without using weapons. The Khajiit unarmed bonus, stacked with the gauntlet, would be a fun build to play with. The Armored Kitten build sounds fun just in the name alone. These effects are on top of being an armor that provides high defense to begin with. While heavy armor can be cumbersome to use at first because of the slowed movement and carry weight limitations, it improves over time with the skill and gives unique bonuses back that not only counteract these problems, but add bonuses on top of them. Going from heavy armor weighing 50 points to nothing, and it now adds more than double the defense from before, helps to alleviate several of the issues with heavy armor that commonly plague wearers of the heavy metal. This tree and type of gear allows for great defensive options, along with some very helpful utility functions for defensive purposes, making this the best tree for warriors due to its high defense capabilities and the additional bonuses on top of that. Now let's get to the next armor skill, Light Armor. This tree has many similarities to Heavy Armor, namely in the defensive category of armor bonuses, but it also has a few notable differences. Unlike Heavy Armor, the Light Armor tree includes a boost to stamina regeneration by 50%, and a small chance to avoid all damage from melee attacks while wearing all light armor. For warriors, additional stamina regen can help with power attacks and shield usage, while the chance to avoid damage completely makes players more willing to get in and start stabbing. These two effects add bonuses to a variety of builds beyond the warrior tree as well. Thieves in particular will enjoy the additional stamina regen when sneak rolling around, and the weightless armor they now wear, allowing for more loot to be hoarded. We also have the element of the stamina buff being useful for simply getting around quicker due to the massive regen bonus, no matter what build we're running with. The light armor tree adds dynamics to light armored characters in a similar way to the heavy armor skill additions to characters. Each skill tree's unique bonuses just add to the already helpful function of improving defenses in general for each type of armor, as well as the weight reprieve that every build could use. Then they add additional bonuses on top of it all that can be used by a variety of builds. Light armor especially needs the defensive capabilities given it's typically much weaker than heavy armor, so that 10% chance to avoid all damage comes in handy when under attack in light armor. The stamina boost also helps if we need to make like a tree and leaf. Jokes aside, both light and heavy armor add valuable bonuses to the respective builds that would use their armor types, even if some of the skills overlap a bit more than I would like. Now we come to the block skill. This skill tree is all about shields, but also includes weapons we can block with, but mostly shield stuff here. We get an increase in the effectiveness of blocking attacks, both physical and magical, and we get some useful mechanical changes to shields beyond defensive stat boosts. At the base, we can block and bash with a shield. With this tree, we unlock new abilities while using shields, such as completely blocking damage from arrows if they hit the shield. We can do a power bash for extra damage. We can increase the shield bash damage by 5 times, believe me when I say that is very fun to play around with. We have a chance to disarm an opponent when power bashing. Time slows down when blocking during an enemy's power attack, and we can knock down most targets when sprinting with the shield raised. We also get a minor bonus to movement speed while a shield or weapon is raised to block an attack. All of these moves combo with whatever we have in our other hand, so take what I said during the one-handed section and apply that to the main hand for an idea of the combinations possible. Imagine knocking down a bandit and then vaporizing them with a shock spell, or ragdolling them in general before we cut them to pieces. Being able to knock enemies over and ragdoll them is an underrated mechanic to toy with. It's a lot of fun, and quite helpful if you need to immobilize a target. It's also incredibly entertaining to shield bash enemies to death. Just make sure your stamina is high enough to kill the enemy, or you have ways to replenish it. Anyway, this skill is a useful tree for controlling how the enemy damages you and how you deal with their attacks. Ranged attacks from projectile weapons can be nullified by blocking with the shield successfully. Magic damage can be cut in half if the shield blocks it. Regular melee attacks, power attacks, and spells can be interrupted with a shield bash. Disarming an enemy reduces their damage output, and knocking enemies down with a charge is a great way to immobilize the enemy repeatedly. All of these effects make using a shield versatile and helpful in different situations, whether charging, bashing, or tanking the hits. It's a great skill tree and set of mechanics to play with, as it turns defensive tools into offensive powers, not to mention how much fun it is to charge around bashing everything to death. Now we come to our final warrior skill, Archery. Archery is all about projectile weaponry. It was mainly designed for bows, but the addition of the crossbow allows these effects to carry over to the Dawnguard's weapon of choice as well. In this tree, we have the traditional bonuses to damage, but also have several mechanical additions we unlock throughout the tree. As we improve our skill, we'll be able to recover twice as many arrows from dead bodies, we can move faster with a bow drawn, we can zoom in our view, we can slow time while zoomed in, we can draw the bow faster, our projectiles will stagger most opponents half the time, and we have a small chance to paralyze the target for a few seconds. All of these abilities add to our options as we progress the tree, keeping archery interesting as we level it up. It's one of the most realized trees when it comes to adding mechanics as we progress, and is one of many reasons for it being one of my favorite skills in the game. Being able to slow time to line up a shot, along with a quick recovery and increased movement speed while lining up other shots, helps to keep the archer lining up targets quickly and with precision. Game assist notwithstanding. The only thing that really ruins archery is when the game tries to adjust your aim for you and it causes you to miss. I hate that so much, as I'm sure many of us do when the game tries to help and it does the opposite. Archery is also one of the more interesting skills because it requires ammunition, unlike every other combat skill, and the damage calculations get complicated once you mix bow or crossbow type with arrow type and skills on top of that. Because of the ammo type making a difference, it's important to scale your ammo based on the enemy you're fighting. Another aspect of this skill is that ammo can be recovered, hence the perk that makes it easier. We can't recover 100% of our ammo exhausted every time, but with the perk and paying attention to when you miss, you should be fine. Just make sure to have more than a handful of arrows when entering an encounter. You don't want to be left to bow bash your way through enemies, no matter how hilarious that may seem in the moment. The greatest advantage of archery as a skill is that it provides the highest effective range for weaponry and ranged combat in the game. This means sniping targets is viable if you know the eccentricities of the shooting system and how best to predict your long shots. This can be incredibly helpful, especially when sneaking, to get one long kill shot from across a river or up on the battlements or anywhere you can think of to get a good shot off. The aiming can get a little wonky depending on the environment, the game assist, and the cutscene system for kill shots can screw up your shot where it doesn't connect properly. When those things don't happen, sniping is a blast, and a very effective way to take enemies out from great distances and boost sneak skills as well. It's a fun build to be an ultra sniper who uses the maximum archery, sneak, and gear combinations to maximize damage without anyone noticing a thing before they're dead. It's essentially a build of, if you can see me, you're already dead. However, one major drawback to archery is that enemies can sometimes have a sixth sense where they will randomly jump to the side to screw up your shot. I have no idea why this exists in the game and what dictates it happening, but it's incredibly frustrating when you go for a shot and an enemy just darts left or right without any concept of where you are. It's just stupid, and it ruins an otherwise interesting and engaging ranged combat system. Now let's get to the thief skills, beginning with Pickpocket. Pickpocket is the art, or rather chance, of looting something on a living person. The tree revolves largely around this system. We can boost our bonus toward pickpocketing someone, but item weight and value reduce our odds no matter what. Additional bonuses are added to our success chance if the target is asleep, if we're looting gold or keys, and we can eventually pickpocket equipped weapons and items, along with harming enemies by placing poisons in their pockets. We also have a perk to give a bonus to our carrying capacity of 100 points for some reason. I'm not sure why this is in this skill tree specifically. It's a great perk to get, and I can see why a thief would want it. It's just weird since pickpocketing has nothing to do with our carry weight, so why would this be in this tree? To be fair, I don't know where else this perk would be placed, so maybe the devs just put it in this tree just to have it somewhere. Maybe it could work in lockpicking since we loot lots of containers in the game? Getting back to the actual skill, I made my complaints of the pickpocket system clear in the Thieves Guild video, but I will repeat some of that here. Pickpocket, unlike other skills, is not a skill that requires actual skill to do. It requires the game to work in your favor with the flip of a coin. That's it. Yes, we can boost our chances with perks, skill ups, potions, and such, but at the end of the day, the actual system is just a game of chance. There's no skill or talent involved. It's always a flip of a coin, and that sucks. It's not a game to play or a system to engage with. It's just the chance of a success or failure put in front of us, and we decide if we want to try. That's it. What I suggested in the Thieves Guild video was a system like lockpicking, where we play a mini-game to get the loot out of the individual's pocket by moving it around in some way until we grab it. Instead, we have random number generation dictating if we fail or succeed. The tree itself makes sense given how simple pickpocket is as a skill, but the system itself is something I consider to be flawed and underwhelming at the baseline. There are many exploits to this system, one being boosting it on skill trainers, and another with quick saving and reloading upon failure, but as I said in the Thieves Guild video, if your solution to the problem is just keep trying until your chances improve, you're just forcing us to deal with the problem by engaging with the problematic system in the first place. It's fighting annoyance with the annoying system itself, and I can't overstate how much I hate the pickpocket system in the game because of the way it works. Next is the lockpicking skill. Like pickpocket, the skill is incredibly simple when you get down to it. Unlike pickpocket, the skill actually works well given its mechanics. When we look at the tree, we get escalating bonuses to picking more advanced locks over time. We also get several unique bonuses. We can gain a copy of a key to a lock if it exists. We can find more golden chests. We have a 50% greater chance of finding special treasures. Picks can start close to the lock opening position, and, one of the best perks, lockpicks never break. These skills all deal with improving our ability to break into containers and doors to grab loot, and that last perk never fails to be helpful, as we'll need to keep a steady supply of lockpicks until we get the unbreakable perk. Once we have that, we only need one. When it comes to actual lockpicking in the game, it works very well given the minigame we play. We have to find the sweet spot by fiddling around before our lockpick breaks. When we fail, we reset and try again. But we're one lockpick down. We also gain a small amount of lockpicking XP when we fail, making this a skill we can boost by simply failing over and over. Lockpicks are very cheap, so boosting this doesn't take many resources to farm it. Granted, failure doesn't net nearly as much XP as succeeding, but it's a lazy way to get the skill up in one place. It's also a skill that becomes harder as we go up the tier list of lock types. Each one requires more skill until we unlock the perk that reduces the difficulty of that particular lock type. This can lead to some uneven balancing regarding the skill, as certain chests and doors will be locked with expert or even master locks early on, making them almost impossible to do unless you have a surgeon's hands with picking them. Once you unlock the perks for those tiers, they become much easier, but you still have to engage in the minigame no matter what skill level you're at. This is something that maintains the engagement when lockpicking, as it's a minigame where there's always a chance for us to be in the wrong spot, so we need to pay attention and be aware of how it works when we feel around for the sweet spot. As I said before, this system works very well given the minigame we play and how the tree tiers up over time. The additional bonuses are also nice to have for every thief in the business. The final thief skill is the most important one, Sneak. The Sneak tree influences our detection rate while sneaking. We gradually decrease our chance of being detected, and we get several utility functions that affect other skills while sneaking. Sneak attacks with one-handed weapons, daggers, and bows get huge boosts to damage dealt. Wearing armor makes half as much noise when we move. We won't trigger pressure plates. We can perform a silent roll forward that looks funny when done. Walking and running don't affect detection, and crouching stops combat for a moment and forces distant enemies to search for us. This tree is reliant on sneaking successfully, which requires us to go undetected by NPCs. This varies between different elements of the NPCs, the gear we have, any bonuses we have from our gear towards sneaking or muffling our sound, what our sneak skill is, if we're in sight of the NPCs, if we're making a lot of racket, and if we're attacking someone in any loud way, like with a spell or power attack, with anything bigger than a dagger. It gets complicated when you break it down. We also have strange inconsistencies where certain enemies will detect us faster than others, and some won't see us when we're sneaking right in front of them sometimes. It gets very confusing to know how well you're sneaking when so many variables affect sneaking successfully. What sneak does for the other skills is also something of note. Sneaking allows us to deal extra damage to targets while sneaking, multiplying damage based on the source. Using bows while sneaking can allow us to take out targets from a distance without being detected. Sneaking near a target and stabbing them with a dagger usually nets an instant kill given the multiplier for dagger damage. Sneaking also helps with avoiding combat if we want to loot stuff without killing anyone, whether through lockpicking our way into a house or pickpocketing someone while they sleep. The guard never realized that I stole his sweet roll. Sneak's main drawback is the way it falls apart once we're found out. Granted, we failed, but most of the effects of sneak disappear once we're seen, with the only options being to run away and reset, or to use one of the abilities to make ourselves scarce, like casting invisibility, or using the Shadow Warrior perk to force enemies to search for us again. This is one downside to stealth builds compared to others. Stealth builds require we remain stealth for it to work, whereas warrior and magic builds can get down and dirty without too many setbacks. Sneak plays very differently to other builds, and sometimes that can be just as much of a con as a pro. However, when sneak works well, it works beautifully. Wiping out a bandit camp without anyone noticing is a great show of skill with daggers and throat cutting. Breaking in and robbing a family blind without anyone knowing only adds to our pocket change. And sniping annoying enemies without them ever knowing where you are is a fun pastime for yours truly. Sneak is a very particular skill, but then again, it also brings a very particular set of bonuses to the game and works for a variety of functions. Whether assassinating, robbing, or simply avoiding enemies, sneak has many uses when done right. Now we get to the first of the trade skills. These aren't technically listed this way in the game, but I wanted to separate them out and this felt like the appropriate way to do it. Anyway, we'll start with Alchemy. This skill is all about crafting potions and poisons through buying or finding ingredients around the world to experiment with at an alchemy lab. The tree has several nodes that simply improve what we craft in one way or another, either generally or specifically. Then we have a few utility bonuses, such as progressively unlocking all ingredients' effects through eating it once. Poisons can be applied to weapons twice as often per poison. 2 ingredients are gathered from plants. We're 50% resistant to all poisons, and all negative effects for potions and all positive effects for poisons are removed. The actual use of alchemy is extended based on how we progress the skill. The process of gathering materials includes buying them from vendors, finding them in the environment to harvest, or finding them on enemies or in chests. Once we have materials, we can eat each one to see 1 to 4 recipes it can be used in, depending on our perks unlocked. Then we go through the alchemy station to mix and match, sometimes using pre-made combinations, or we can mix and match to learn new potion recipes. The downside is we have a chance of failure, which consumes the resources, and we get nothing. We lose. The potions and poisons effects can vary across many different avenues. Some poisons may do particular types of damage, such as lingering damage over time, or high instant damage to health, stamina, or magicka. Sometimes they'll paralyze the target. Some potions are used for restoring health, stamina, or magicka in various tiers. Other potions can be used to increase specific skills for a limited time. This can be helpful when wanting to maximize the usefulness of a skill. Overclocking Enchanting can lead to some of the most powerful enchantments in the game if you do it at the right time and have the right potion handy. When it comes to this skill tree specifically, the tree itself is pretty lackluster. It's just buff potions and poisons 10 times over. We get a few decent bonuses like high resistance to poisons, gathering more ingredients per harvest, and exponential recipe research, but the rest of the tree is just making things stronger repeatedly. It would have been cool to unlock different specialty potions in this tree. Maybe we unlock super potions and poisons that can only be learned through the skill tree. Maybe they scale up as well. Give us something more than, it's better now, over and over. The actual application and management of the potions and poisons also becomes an issue for this skill, as we can create a lot of versions of the same potion that take up different slots in our inventory. This clutters up our inventory and makes it harder to use them, since we may have 5 different variants of health potions that give 1 health more or less than each other. When you've got tons of potions and poisons in your inventory, and it's a chore to use them effectively, that's a problem given how many potions we need to make in order to reach skill level 100. Alchemy as a skill is absolutely useful for potions and poisons, especially if they give skill bonuses or fill up our reserves when facing enemies. The implementation is problematic though, with the cluttering of our inventory, the grind needed to enhance our potions, and the fact that it's sometimes easier to just buy potions from a vendor because they repeatedly sell the same type of potion and sell off all our variants to keep things efficient. This is one of the few skills that I never really use in the game, as it's simply too much of a chore to mess around with the recipe concoctions, and it's annoying to have to open up my inventory repeatedly to use up the potions and poisons I've crafted. Imagine having to favorite 20 different versions of potions and poisons, and having to re-favorite them once you craft a whole new set. It tends to devolve into me crafting a bunch of random things, selling the majority of them, then repeating this whenever I stock up on enough ingredients. This skill has an interesting way to craft potions and poisons, but it's such an annoyance to manage in the inventory and in combat that I tend to skip over it just to get back to the other parts of the game I enjoy. I'm sure tons of people enjoy crafting potions. I've got no problem with that part. It's just the management and the skill tree itself that are my biggest complaints about engaging in this system. It's a messy grind to progress this skill when it could have been more fleshed out, and yet streamlined as well. Imagine if we got tiers of super potions to unlock in the skill tree, and we find different ways of making the same potions with different ingredients. Then they could stack and not be hard to manage in our inventory. Imagine if we unlocked more perks than potions are better now times 7. As a skill, alchemy often gets forgotten about whenever I play the game, which is never a good thing, and the workarounds to it only prove how little some will use it when playing. I've hardly ever run out of potions while playing Skyrim. Yeah, specialty potions are harder to come by, but potions for stats and poisons for damage? Those are not hard to find at all while wandering around, making this skill not nearly as valuable as it should be in an RPG. Even by comparison to some of the other skills, this one seems to be the most tacked on just so they can have another crafting system, no matter how repetitive it gets. Now let's get into blacksmithing. This tree is one of the simplest and most linear of them all, as we unlock different sets of gear to craft in tiers. The only exception to unlocking gear is Arcane Blacksmith, which allows us to improve magical weapons and armor. When you look at the progression of the tree, it goes down 2 pathways, one side for heavy armor, the other for light armor. This helps players focus on the pathway that they want to progress down given their build preferences. If we want heavy armor, we'll progress steelsmithing, the root upgrade, then go through Dwarven, Orcish, Ebony, Daedric, and end on dragon armor. If we want light armor, we'll progress steelsmithing, then go through Elven, advanced armors, glassmithing, and also end up at dragon armor. Each level of gear we progress to will typically be better than the previous tier, barring some additions made through the DLC unlocks that are parallel with certain skill stages. Dragon armor is unique as it houses both light and heavy armor variants. Because of that, this skill can act as a workaround if you want one side of the tree, but also want to unlock the strongest tier of gear for the other side as well. You essentially just progress all your heavy armor skills until you unlock dragon armor, which also crafts the strongest light armor as well. It's a neat workaround given the way the skill tree works, but it does undermine unlocking any further perks as they simply become cosmetic options once the strongest gear is unlocked. When it comes to smithing itself, we must combine specific resources. A typical set of armor or weapons will require various types of ingots mixed together. This means we need to smelt them from ore into ingots. Then we need leather and leather strips, requiring us to tan hides and turn them into leather and leather into strips. Then we add various tiers of materials to craft whatever weapon or piece of armor we want. Some sets require non-smithing materials, such as Daedric gear needing Daedric hearts, and some of the DLC sets require resources from their respective DLCs, such as Stalrim needed for its armor set, which uses the resources unique to Solstheim. We also have the option to craft additional things like construction materials and jewelry. The former helps construct a house, and the latter can be used to craft our ring and necklace items for our characters. Smithing is one of the most useful and most broken skills when you know what you're doing. It's useful in that it's very simple to progress, and many vendors sell the resources to upgrade your gear and skills. Oftentimes, the blacksmiths themselves sell you items right next to their forges, so it's very convenient. This makes it easy to work on the skill without having to go out searching for materials all the time, although that can sometimes help depending on the materials you need. While you work on the skill, you also unlock greater weapons and armor to use, effectively making you stronger for every tier of gear you unlock and craft. We also upgrade our armor and weapons to make them even stronger after crafting already strong gear. Adding this on top of enchantments can make some crazy strong sets of gear to use. On top of all this, you end up with a ton of gear that you can use to make some money, which leads into why this is also one of the most broken skills. Mass crafting iron daggers is one of the cheapest ways to get a skill up, as the daggers are cheap to make and the resources can be bought from nearly any vendor that sells smithing materials. When you couple that with enchanting them to drastically multiply their value, you essentially have a skill farming loop. Between crafting a cheap iron dagger, enchanting it to quintuple its value, selling it off, then buying the resources to repeat the process, you'll usually have enough funds and resources to do this infinitely if you do it right, maybe with a decent profit on top of it all. This effectively boosts two important trade skills at once between smithing and enchanting, not to mention the speech skill ups as well. A minor aspect of smithing is the choice it gives the player in terms of what to craft and why. We can craft many things that have a significant overlap of resources, so it comes down to what we want to use or sell. One simple example is choosing between making daggers for easy skills or making arrows for ammo. Daggers are typically the cheapest item to craft in each tier, but arrows can be more useful if you're an archer and have an abundance of ingots that you need to get rid of. Arrows are extremely cheap, costing only a single ingot and piece of firewood, and they have no carry weight, so we can take 100 points worth of ingots and firewood and turn that into a ton of arrows to lose some weight. This also helps avoid weighing the player down with crafting gear. Sometimes crafting things en masse has a weird effect of increasing your weight because the materials somehow weigh less than the final product. It's not a constant issue, but it can get annoying to be crafting a ton of things and then you're too fat to run around to sell them. To be fair, this is a minor inconvenience, so it's nothing game-breaking, and you should be able to manage dealing with the issue quickly enough. It's just weird how the materials make something that weighs more than the combined weight of the items. We also have the abundance of exploits that come with smithing as it relates to other skills. We've already been over the smithing enchanting loop, but another is using magic to turn basic iron ore into gold ore with transmute. This multiplies the value of the item exponentially and allows us to craft tons of expensive jewelry from the cheapest ore to buy. This makes grinding the smithing skill go relatively quickly given that the skill value goes up based on the quality of the items crafted. We also have the same smithing enchanting loop possible for leather bracers, as they are an extremely cheap item to make and only require us to hold leather on our character to craft them. We can usually buy leather and strips from various vendors, on top of animal hides we can convert to leather as well. This helps to keep the inventory clean and streamlined by comparison to iron dagger farming. In any case, smithing works very well when we know what we're doing, and also allows us to unlock valuable gear for multiple purposes. We can use it to get powerful weapons and sturdy defenses, while also making some money on the side, or we can use it to help construct our houses in the game. That last part is relatively minor, but it was a neat inclusion in Hearthfire to add these materials to smithing. Overall, smithing is one of the universal skills that every build will want to invest in, either for the gear or profits. Now let's get into enchanting. The majority of the enchanting tree is all about boosting the enchantments to our gear. The exceptions to this include soul gems providing extra magicka for recharging, and death blows to creatures trapping a percentage of their soul, recharging the weapon slightly. Other than that, it's mostly just about making enchantments better. This tree is relatively lackluster in terms of what we unlock. It tends to fall under the banner of just make things stronger, or just make specific types of things stronger. The more interesting perks come from everything that deals with soul gems, recharging weapons, and adding 2 enchantments to 1 item. Those provide some interesting results beyond it's just better now, like the rest of the tree. The way enchanting works is that we disenchant items found in the world that are magical. We learn the enchantments on said items, but the items are destroyed in the process. Then we enchant other items with those enchantments using soul gems to complete the process. The strength of the enchantment is a mix of what enchantment skills we have, how strong the enchantment was to begin with, how strong the soul gem is, and if we have any additional effects like potions boosting our skill at the time on top of our base skill. Enchantments include a wide range of stat boosts, increased regeneration, discounts for spell uses, increased carrying capacity, noise reduction, increased skill efficacy, and many more. This makes enchanting something that can absolutely break the game once you know how to abuse other skills around it. For instance, it is possible to create a set of gear that reduces destruction spell costs by 100%, breaking the balance of magic in the game. Granted, this takes some know-how and special exploits across alchemy and enchanting, but the option is there to break mage balancing. Yeah, it can be fun to obliterate everything around you as an overpowered mage, but it destroys the balancing of the game to have this as an option. Enchanting is also a broken skill as it goes up exponentially quickly. One enchantment can net you an entire skill up for the first several levels, and it usually only takes 3 or 4 enchants to level the skill in the higher ranges. This makes this one of the trees you can grind up the fastest, given that the skill goes up based on enchanting at a flat rate. It doesn't matter what item or enchantment or what strength of soul gem is used. It also levels up the same amount each time, and that amount is already too big for balancing's sake. Enchanting is incredibly useful as a skill, both for the additional bonuses to characters, but also for the money involved in selling enchanted gear. See the smithing enchanting loop from earlier. However, it is also a skill that can break the game due to how easy it is to exploit for levels and overpowered gear. It needed a serious rebalancing, both in terms of how overpowered it is to get up and use, but also to deepen the skill tree in a way to avoid it becoming so overclocked in the first place due to the repetitive buffs we get through the skill tree itself. It's an incredibly helpful and broken skill to have in a game like this. I love using it, don't get me wrong, but from a balance perspective, it needed significant tweaks to fix its issues. The last skill we'll cover is Speech. This skill is all about interactions with other NPCs. The tree itself has a large set of bonuses toward the different speech interactions we'll have in the game. We can make buying and selling prices better for us. We can make prices better with the opposite sex because we're hot stuff. We can sell anything to most merchants. We can invest in most shops to increase their gold allowances. We can barter stolen items. We can increase most shops' gold allowance in general. We can bribe guards to ignore crimes. And we can increase our persuasion and intimidation skills. This skill is quite varied when it comes to its bonuses, so it helps to carefully pick and choose what we want. Sometimes having better buying and selling prices is more valuable than selling stolen goods. That's largely dictated by what questlines we're doing at the time, so some of these skills will be more beneficial than others depending on who we're interacting with in the game. The bonuses to a merchant's gold count also helps us to clean up our inventory at a faster rate, since we have more gold per person for selling off our junk. Then we have utility functions in the boosts to bribery, persuasion, and intimidation. These help us avoid unnecessary fights, although it isn't clear exactly how convincing we'll be in each conversation. This makes the speech skill one of the harder ones to predict how effective it will be when we're using it, and how well we're leveling it up in the moment. Buying and selling high-tier items tends to be the best way to level this up quickly, but that also requires buying and selling high-tier items that cost thousands of gold. This makes speech one of, if not the, most expensive skill to level up in the game, due to the best strategy being to buy lots of expensive items. Yes, there are trainers around to help, and we passively get this up when buying and selling goods, but if we actively want to get this up, we're about to bring depression down on our coin purses. This skill is one that provides a lot of uses in different situations, as several speech checks are found throughout the game that can allow us to avoid combat or skip certain parts of quests if our skill is high enough. It also allows us to manage our finances better and can help when dealing with criminal activities. Bribing guards can help make them look the other way, but sometimes the price of silence can be more than what the crime's cost is. The formula for calculating this breaks at higher levels, so we can end up paying 4,000 gold to avoid getting in trouble for stealing a tomato worth $5. It's a skill that lets us pick our battles to an extent and avoid them if we can manage it. It's also the most RPG skill of the game and fits well with a game that has so many NPCs to talk to for various reasons. It's one of the most well-defined skills and trees in the game, with varied uses that any build may or may not want depending on the content they're engaging in, although it can affect some things in weird ways. But with that, we've covered all the skills. Now we're going to go over some special forms we can take in the game, starting with the basic vampire. If we are infected with Sanguinaire Vangeris, it will eventually reach full vampirism, which comes in 4 stages. This allows us to have some unique effects due to the disease and its progression. It progresses by not feeding, which makes no sense as the whole point of vampires is that they feed on the blood of the living. Vampires in Skyrim are just weird apparently. We also gain greater powers and weaknesses as we don't feed. Seriously, this system just makes no sense for the way it progresses. It's antithetical to progression when a character doing nothing nets progression, but actively feeding resets our skills. This just doesn't make sense, either from a lore perspective or mechanically. Anyway, let's go over what abilities and effects we have while a vampire. We have complete resistance to poison and disease, we have a growing frost resistance, but we also have a growing weakness to fire. We gain some unique buffs that come with pros and cons as well. Our illusion spells are buffed. We are harder to detect while sneaking. We have an escalating weakness to sunlight that reduces our attributes, and we cannot regenerate during the day if we're outside. We also gain some abilities that progressively get stronger as we go through the 4 stages of vampirism, such as a drain health spell, we can reanimate a dead body, we can see better in the dark for a limited time, we can calm people down, we can feed on them, and we can become invisible once per day. As far as effects go, the combination of elements is unique, but the abilities and buffs themselves leave much to be desired. The most notable spell of vampires is Vampiric Drain, since there are no other spells like it. Sadly, it's extremely weak as we progress the game. All the other spells are variants of other spells or abilities in the game, so they aren't that special just because we're a vampire now. The drawbacks to being a vampire can become cumbersome if you're exploring during the day, since we have no regeneration available, so we'll only be able to effectively operate at night or when inside places that cover us from the sun. This fits given we're the lords and ladies of the night, but can become mechanically frustrating when we have to keep resetting the world to the right time of day to be able to regenerate. In my experience, being a basic vampire is not all it's cracked up to be, and becomes more of a chore than anything else. All the unique effects and abilities don't make up for the drawbacks and limitations we'll deal with while looking for a Nordic smoothie. It's simply annoying and boring to be a vampire when this is what we deal with, and I have nothing else to add besides that. Next we've got the Vampire Lord. This is a massive step up from basic vampirism, as we have much more unique abilities and an entire perk tree to invest in. This is on top of a unique form that comes with advantages and disadvantages. Our advantages include an increase to all stats, magicka regeneration is increased slightly, and we can regen during the day, but it's a small amount. The disadvantages include not being able to use any abilities outside of those designated for Vampire Lords. We have several of the vampire drawbacks mentioned previously, and we can't loot or lockpick anything while in this form. We also can have a hard time moving around inside buildings because of the bulkiness of our form. Our new abilities include a buffed vampiric drain projectile that drains all stats from a target, melee attacks with our claws that do the same, a bat's special move to teleport forward in a swarm of bats, we can float across water, we can detect all creatures, we can transform into a mist to become invulnerable and regenerate, we have a cloud of bats that surround us and deal damage, we have a grab that can choke enemies Darth Vader style, we can summon a gargoyle to fight for us, we can paralyze a target, and we have the option to transform into our Vampire Lord form at will, which is a major bonus. The tree attached to this form is incredibly helpful given the various abilities and passive bonuses we unlock through killing, and the powers we can use while in the form are varied and make us extremely overpowered. This is the only word I can use to ultimately describe this form, as we get increased stats, have tons of spells that can summon help, we can drain stats of enemies, and we have plenty of spells to defend ourselves. The main issue with this being broken as a build is that the numerical bonuses are simply too high for anything to kill us unless we're playing on a higher difficulty. Granted, this makes this form extremely entertaining to play since we shred through our enemies like Harkon said we would. The problem is obvious given we're utterly broken unless playing on extreme difficulties. The only other issue is getting stuck in areas because the form is too bulky. It's not a constant issue, but it does get annoying. This is the overall best form of the group, due to the control we have over when we can use it, and all the bonuses and unique abilities we can use from it. Now let's discuss being a werewolf. Like the Vampire Lord, we get a tree of skills to unlock and a new form to play around with. The tree largely buffs our attacks, howl abilities, and stats, as well as increasing the effectiveness of feeding by widening the number of creatures we can feed from. That's it as far as the tree is concerned. Our advantages come from full resistance to all diseases, in a form that deals high damage, has increased health and stamina, we move incredibly quickly, and we have unique howls. One that can make the enemy flee and nearby wolves come to aid us, one can summon 2 red pack members to aid us, one reveals nearby prey, and the other boosts a higher level fear effect. The drawbacks are that we cannot use any abilities outside of melee attacks and the howls. Our health regeneration is dropped to 0 unless we have a ring that helps, otherwise we have to feed on corpses to restore health. We have to feed to keep our form going and progress our skills. We can only use this form once per day unless we have a unique ring that helps. We can't loot or lockpick anything while in this form, and we can be too bulky to make it through some doorways, similar to the Vampire Lord. As it stands now, lycanthropy is one of the most underwhelming abilities in the game. Yes, werewolves are incredibly strong, but their skill tree is bare bones at best, and the form itself gets boring when we have a few melee moves and 4 howl variants, and that's all we have. It gets incredibly repetitive due to these elements. As an additional annoyance, the kill chem effects seem to activate way too often, so we'll spend even less time playing this simple form when we attack once or twice and get a special attack where we sit back and watch us kill an enemy over and over. The unique animations for those are a nice bonus, but they pop up so often that they slow down actually fighting and playing the game as a beast. The drawbacks to this form and the requirements to sustain it are ultimately what diminish playing as a werewolf. We can only use this ability once a day, so if we get stuck and can't get through a doorway, or want to loot any of our victims, we have to wait for the effect to wear off, wait a day, then we can return to the form, unless we do Hercine's quest to get his ring, to allow us unlimited transformations per day. That's such a stupid system that just wastes the player's time when we have to do so much waiting just to do a minor thing we can do easily without a form, or with the Vampire Lord form. This also feeds into issues if we're out killing and NPCs for quests appear, but because we're in werewolf form, we can't talk to them and they'll attack us since we're monsters and can't de-wolf at will. We also have the feeding system, which is required for keeping our form going, leveling our skills up, and restoring health. This means we're on a constant timer if we want to stay in this form, or we'll have to wait even longer to revert back to our normal form. See my wasted time point from earlier. The feeding system also becomes repetitive in itself when every living person or animal can be fed on. This leads to tons of time spent eating corpses during combat to restore stats, or we have a long eating session after killing everyone if we want the skill progression and health restoration. Again, this just soaks up time we could be doing anything else. The Vampire Lord automatically gains skills by killing with its abilities, so we don't have all these repetitive animations and actions to increase our skills in that form. It could have worked in largely the same way for the werewolf, but the devs just wanted to waste our time and force us through the same animations repeatedly. It's clear that the developers didn't care too much about lycanthropy as a form or skill tree when compared to the Vampire Lord and its tree. There are so many variables for the Vampire Lord across its abilities and skill tree unlocks when compared to the werewolf's basic moveset and lackluster skill tree bonuses. Being a werewolf becomes suboptimal given its incredibly long list of drawbacks and annoyances to the form, let alone when compared to the Vampire or Vampire Lord. See all the points I made previously about how long-winded many of the werewolf actions are and how much repetition is had when playing as one. Granted, the basic werewolf form was on par with the basic vampire form at launch, which both sucked for the most part, but with the Dawnguard DLC and update, the vampires get a massive upgrade while the werewolves get some empty calorie fluff. Suffice it to say, I think the developers could have done so much more with lycanthropy. In all fairness, werewolves are incredibly simple creatures in this world given they are beasts, so they can't have tons of magic effects like vampire lords. That is forgivable, but they still could have expanded the utility functions of the werewolf through the skill tree at the very least. Maybe include a few perks for health regeneration, more control over de-wolfing, and other effects that would be useful for counteracting some of the tedium of this ability. As it stands now, I consider the werewolf form to be the most annoying to use, even when it's almost as overpowered as the Vampire Lord. This form shreds as well, but it shreds in an incredibly repetitive and boring fashion by comparison to Vampire Lords. Again, the devs could have done more with this form, but it feels like they created this skill tree out of obligation because the vampires were getting a buff with the Vampire Lord form, so they probably felt like they had to do something for werewolves as well. But as I said, it's lackluster, and they could have created something better. Now we'll be getting into special abilities, beginning with shouts. There are a variety of shouts that give the player a unique ability. We unlock them through various quests and locations, often through a word wall, and each shout requires 3 words to unlock its full strength. Each word typically requires a dragon soul to unlock, and cooldowns for full shouts vary depending on the shout itself. The effects of each shout are usually affected by how many words of the shout you say before releasing the shout button, impacting its power and recovery time, but there are a few exceptions. Here's a very quick recap of what we can unlock as far as shout abilities. We can call animals to fight for us, we can reveal the life forces around us, we can cause faster melee attacks for allies, we can become ethereal to avoid all damage, we can bend others to our will, we can call Odiving, we can call a hero from Sovngarde to fight for us, we can clear bad weather, we can create a cyclone to throw enemies around, we can disarm opponents, we can cause enemies to flee, we can buff ourselves like a dragon with increased damage and defenses, we can force dragons to land, we can drain the stats of an enemy, we can increase our weapon speed, we can breathe fire, we can breathe frost, we can freeze an enemy in an ice block, we can soothe wild animals, we can weaken enemies, we can slow time while we speed up, we can soul trap and even kill a target, we can call down a storm to attack foes, we can summon Durnavir, we can throw our voice to fool enemies, we can Fusro Da people off cliff sides, and we can lurch forward. As you can tell from this list, there are a lot of combat and utility functions through several of these shouts. Become Ethereal is a fantastic shout if you need to make a risky jump or need to get past something that will probably kill you. Unrelenting Force, Cyclone, and Ice Form are good shouts for immobilizing enemies for a brief time or to create breathing room. Whirlwind Sprint makes getting around faster and can help in combat if you need to get away from enemies briefly. Dragon Rend is incredibly helpful when fighting dragons, as it keeps them grounded, and Bend Will can be used to ride them. A lot of the attack shouts are helpful for obvious reasons, as weakening enemies, disarming them, or simply chucking a giant wall of fire at them generally helps the player kill them. Throw Voice and Aura Whisper are good shouts for those that sneak around, as the former is good for distracting enemies, and Aura Whisper is useful for finding targets in general. The only shout that would be considered lackluster is Clear Skies, as it's only meant to be used for clearing the path up to Parthenax and clearing the mist Alduin creates in Sovngarde. It has a bonus effect of clearing snowy, cloudy, and rainy weather in the game most of the time, but that's more of a cosmetic thing than an actual mechanical advantage when using it. Plus I love the rain, so Clear Skies can stay away from me. As far as shouts go, they offer a mix of variable moves to aid us in some meaningful way, but some fall back on simply doing something that some other ability can do. Frost and Fire Breath, along with Storm Call, are good examples of this, as these are just shouts that deal large-scale frost, fire, or shock damage. They are packaged in a unique way, but ultimately just act as special versions of casting those types of spells as a mage. Others overlap with other mage skills, like Dismay basically having the same effect as any fear move, and Kind's Peace also acts the same as Calm, but just for animals. That isn't to say these effects are bad in themselves, it's just that some shouts overlap with abilities so much that they undermine having the shout version when the shout versions have longer cooldowns compared to spells we can spam. There are a notable number of shouts that offer unique effects, though, like Dragon Rend being a game changer when dealing with dragons. Likewise, Become Ethereal is incredible when used in an emergency, or when you need to make a long drop that would kill you normally. Whirlwind Sprint is one of the shouts that I would consider to be a middle-of-the-road kind of ability, as it acts as a quick dash forward. This can help in certain situations, especially when encumbered or when spamming the shout wait repeat strategy, but when the game is played normally, sprinting usually nets faster movement from one place to another. Again, that's without the easy exploit of shout wait repeat, but it is worth mentioning given the way the exploit can be disabled due to combat. Now let's get racially charged by going over racial abilities. We won't be going over the racial buffs yet, but that will appear in the next section. Just a note, most of these abilities can be used once per day across the board. Now let's jump in for real. Argonians can regenerate health 10 times faster for 1 minute. Bretons can absorb 50% of the magicka of hostile spells for 1 minute. Dark Elves can make opponents take fire damage per second when they get too close for 1 minute. High Elves can regenerate magicka at 2500% of normal speed for 1 minute. Imperials can calm nearby people for 1 minute. Khajiit can have improved night vision for 1 minute multiple times a day. Nords can cause enemies to flee for 30 seconds. Orcs can go berserk where they take half damage but deal double damage for 1 minute, although it doesn't affect magic at all for some reason. Redguard can regenerate stamina 10 times faster for 1 minute, and Wood Elves can make an animal fight for them for 1 minute. So, these effects vary quite a bit. The regeneration of the Argonians, Redguard, and especially the High Elves can be incredibly helpful in the right circumstances, so their advantages are obvious. The Orc Berserk is incredibly good for melee fighters as well. Then we have more niche effects with the rest where each of their abilities can be helpful, but they often fall within encounters that would become rare to use effectively. Bretons absorbing magicka is great, but only works when fighting mages. Dark Elves having a fire cloak around them is handy, but only when enemies are within melee range, and it doesn't do a lot of damage as we level up. Imperials calming people can help, but that only works when you're trying to avoid conflict with these individuals around you. Nords causing enemies to flee can be helpful, but also delays victory when enemies run away. Wood Elves having a pet fight for them is handy, but only works on animals and lasts for 1 minute, which isn't very long in terms of game time given what we can do in a minute. It also doesn't hold a candle to having a follower in general who has more utility function, and you don't have to worry about them abandoning you. Then we have the Khajiit ability to see better in the dark. This is just a bad racial ability when this hardly affects the game. Yes, sometimes it helps to see better in the dark, but unless you're playing on the darkest settings possible, you probably won't need this ability at all. All the others offer some bonus that aids in something for combat or dealing with NPCs. This just makes us see better in the dark when we really don't need it that often. It's not worth it, and I think something else stealth or speech related would have worked better as a racial bonus for Khajiit. Maybe an extended muffle effect, or an increase to haggling for 60 seconds. Anything is preferable to seeing slightly better at night. Now let's go over some unique abilities. There is a plethora of powers that we come across due to different questlines and location rewards. Besides the ones we've already mentioned, we can summon a field of tentacles that poisons foes within it. We have several abilities that partially or fully restore stats. We have several that regenerate stats or reduce the cost of certain abilities partially or completely. We can trap targets where they can't attack or be harmed. We can absorb various stats from others. We can reduce damage taken from various sources. We can summon unique NPCs to help us in combat or otherwise. We can become invisible through different means. We can bypass any expert lock or lower once a day. We can blow ourselves up, that one's fun. And we can use Steam as a damaging spell. That list overlaps several abilities in certain spots, but you can hopefully understand that there are a ton of powers available for a wide range of purposes, whether that be exclusively beneficial for certain builds or general powers that help every player in some way. A few highlights include the Secret of Arcana, which makes spells cost nothing for a limited time, the various Dremora summoning spells that let them hold our gear, sell it off, or generally help us, Sun Flare, which is the one where we explode, Secret of Strength, which makes power attacks cost no stamina for 30 seconds, and Shadow Cloak of Nocturnal, which makes us automatically become invisible when sneaking for 2 minutes. Each of these abilities can be extremely useful for particular builds, and the Dremora we spawn can help with inventory management or general sidekick aid. Many of the unique abilities can be helpful and will recharge every day, making them extremely useful when combining certain abilities. Pairing telekinesis with the Secret of Arcana allows us to cast telekinesis indefinitely as long as we continuously cast a spell, which nets an incredibly quick boost to Alteration. This is a favorite of mine, and one I would highly recommend once you've managed to get the spell and power. The Dremora we can summon to act as a pack mule or a vendor are incredibly helpful for obvious reasons as well, giving us options across combat and general gameplay. This vast number of abilities across shouts and the various powers we can have all add to that growing list of options as we progress the game. This keeps us open to trying new things, as these powers are not restrictive by build, as we can usually work around certain quest lines and locations to get what we want, even if we don't use skills associated with them often or at all. This freedom is one of the major benefits to Skyrim's progression, as we can continuously stack all these powers on top of each other as we progress until we become the greatest Dragonborn ever. Granted, we can't get all of them without cheating, but we can get pretty close, and having those options available acts as a reminder of our progress and an invitation to experiment given the breadth of powers available for various uses. Now we'll go over various buffs we can get throughout the game and how helpful they can be, or not be. You'll see as we go. We'll start with racial buffs, and to get it out of the way, I'm not going over any skill boosts inherent to each race at the beginning of the game. Just saying that to clear it up. Anyway, the Argonians gain a 50% resistance to disease, can breathe underwater, and get a minor boost to unarmed damage. Bretons have a 25% resistance to magic, Dark Elves have a 50% resistance to fire, High Elves have an extra 50 magicka, Imperials can find more gold around the world when looting, Khajiit get an unarmed boost because of their claws, Nords have a 50% resistance to frost, Orcs get no racial bonus outside of the Berserk ability, Redguard have a 50% resistance to poison, and Wood Elves have a 50% resistance to poison and disease. When you list them out like that, it makes it very clear that some races were favored over others. Argonians get more bonuses than others, High Elves get a larger boost to a base stat, and Imperials can find more money constantly. The others devolve into resistance boosts to various things, and that's it. I feel bad for Orcs especially, given they don't get anything besides their angry fighter power. The Khajiit unarmed boost is significant enough to be interesting when used, but it also comes with the caveat that it requires we don't use anything besides our claws to enjoy this benefit. Many of these racial bonuses are very niche and often only take effect in very specific encounters. You'll only notice the Dark Elf resistance to fire when fighting enemies with fire. Likewise, Nords will only notice the difference in frost resistance when fighting enemies with frost. These bonuses aren't terrible in and of themselves, but when you give far better ones like a large basic stat boost, a constant passive that helps acquire gold, or a unique way to fight, you're misbalancing the bonuses when you list them out, and half of them are just resistances to some damage type. If High Elves have increased magicka, why not buff the Orc with increased health? If we give Imperials additional gold throughout the game, why can't we give Wood Elves extra pelts from animals? There were opportunities to create more dynamic bonuses that could be employed in unique ways for bonuses beyond basic defenses. When every other race gets a basic resistance boost and that's it makes the divide between more unique bonuses more glaring. High Elves having increased magicka is incredibly helpful at the base for whatever build we want to use if we use magicka at all. That has a variety across a spectrum in terms of how beneficial the bonus is. Likewise, every Imperial character will simply be richer than others due to their ability to sniff out coins from dark corners of the world. This helps literally any build we play as when being an Imperial, since we'll have additional resources flowing in constantly. The problem isn't that the defenses get boosted, it's the discrepancy between all the bonuses. 6 of the 10 races have some defense buff, with only the Argonian having additional bonuses on top of that. Then we have one race, the Orc, that gets no bonus buff at all, which just seems unfair by comparison to the Argonian getting 3. These buffs are imbalanced, plain and simple, and there were opportunities to make more in-depth and dynamic bonuses that could affect our choice of character. If we have one race have a basic stat boost, give 2 other boosts to 2 other races. If we have one passive boost to a core item in the game we'll use often, expand that benefit to other races and change the items. As I said, it's simply imbalanced between the races, with some getting great benefits, and others getting lackluster or even no bonuses at all. Again, the Orcs were done dirty. Now let's discuss standing stones, at least the ones that give buffs specifically, as we've already been over the ones that give unique powers we have to activate. We'll start with a list of what they can do. We can increase our magicka regeneration by 100%, but we take 100% more damage from magic. We can absorb 50% of spell damage and gain 50 extra magicka, but we regenerate it 50% slower. We can regenerate health and stamina 25% faster. We can have an additional 50 armor points along with a 25% boost to magic resistance. All skills can improve 15% faster. All magic skills improve 20% faster. All stealth skills improve 20% faster. All combat skills improve 20% faster. And we can make worn armor of all types weigh nothing and carry no speed penalty, along with an additional 100 points of carry weight. So, this list varies across many helpful abilities for specific builds, many utility functions that can be helpful in general, and some constant boosts to skill progression. These buffs actually remain engaging and varied for personalization across the list, and I'm surprised I'm saying that in a game this imbalanced based on what we've covered so far. There are a few we mentioned before that are more like powers than buffs, but as far as the buff ones go, they each have a strong reason for being, and they all serve a valuable purpose. When we factor in the addition of the Ethereal Crown, which is an item that allows us to double up on standing stones, the combinations become even crazier. Imagine having the massive carry weight boost, and then you have another 20% boost to stealth skills. You can pickpocket and loot for days with that much open carry weight. Imagine combining health and stamina regen with the additional armor and boost to magic resistance. Your tank build suddenly got much beefier. Imagine combining the boost to magic skills along with the risk and reward of 100% extra magicka regen and damage taken. It's the ultimate glass cannon build for mages. Imagine stacking the boost to all skills with the additional boost to a certain archetype. Progression will be swift and rewarding. From what we just discussed, the usefulness of these standing stone buffs is apparent for all to see, and it becomes an even greater boon once we stack them. Granted, that takes a special DLC quest to get the crown, but it shouldn't take too long to finish it up and craft a pretty headpiece for additional bonuses. Even if you don't do that, these bonuses still provide a wide range of bonuses for whatever build we play with, or general bonuses that become helpful. My personal favorites are the carry weight bonuses from the Steed Stone, the basic skill boost to everything from the Lover Stone, and the specialty boosts. These buffs do a great job of adding additional dynamics to our builds, either in what they boost for our builds, or how they help us progress them. Now we come to blessings. They each provide a minor buff and cure most diseases in the game, but only for a limited, but long, period of time. This usually lasts for 12 real-time hours, so these buffs won't need to be reapplied that often unless you're one of those people who only play Skyrim and live in a gamer dungeon. Anyway, let's get to the buff list. Akatosh increases our magic regeneration by 10%. Archery increases our health by 25 points. Ariel makes us 10% more effective with missile weapons. Dibella increases our speechcraft by 10. Julianos increases our magicka by 25 points. Kinnereth increases our stamina by 25 points. Mara makes healing spells restore 10% more. Nocturnal makes us 10% harder to detect. Stendar makes our shields block 10% more damage. Talos reduces the time between shouts by 20%, and Zenithar makes prices 10% better. As was said earlier, these are all minor buffs, so their numbers aren't crazy when it comes to their benefits. They are balanced for the most part, but I would like to have seen a more even split of regen options for stamina and health. We already have one for magicka, so replacing some of the more niche bonuses like Mara's healing bonus or Stendar's shield bonus with health and stamina regen respectively could have been an interesting way to divide the blessings up and make things more even. As it stands now, I'd say all these bonuses are equally helpful and mostly balanced, but the focus on magicka and magic-related things does seem a little too weighted toward mage abilities to call it perfectly balanced. Now let's get to some unique buffs we haven't covered yet. Some of these come from completing quests, while others are gained through items we can equip or use like armor bonuses and potions. We won't go over every item variation, but we'll mention some unique ones we can find. We can get a 10% boost to melee damage, a 15% resistance boost to magic, a 10-point boost to the Enchanting skill, a 25% boost to armor when wearing a dwarven armor, and blacksmithing increases 15% faster. We can move more quietly while poisoning enemies that get too close. We can remove all damage to followers when using attacks, shouts, or destruction spells. Dragons do 25% less melee damage. We can spawn a fireworm to fight for us for 1 minute when using fire breath. Our unrelenting force can deal increased damage and may disintegrate enemies. Our frost breath encases foes in ice for 15 seconds. While ethereal, we recover health 25% faster. Healing spells and potions restore 25% more health for 8 hours. Fire breath does 25% more damage. We stagger 25% less, and enemies stagger 25% more. All skills improve 15% faster due to us having a spouse. We do 10% more damage and get 10% better prices from the opposite sex. Anywhere gems are found, we have a greater chance to find more of them. We have all skills improve 5% faster for 8 hours after resting. Healing spells cure 10% more. Reading skill books gives an extra skill point. Combat skills are 10% more effective. Stealth skills are 10% more effective. All spells cost 10% less magicka, and enchantments are 10% more powerful. There's a 25% chance to create a duplicate potion when crafting them. Animals won't attack or flee from us for 24 hours, and there are others that overlap with many of these in different ways. This list crosses over various quests in the game, as well as unique bonuses from items that are passive or unique potions that cause a permanent effect. This doesn't even cover enchanting options and potions we can craft, as I don't want to have a list lasting 20 minutes to go through. As you heard earlier, there are a lot of effects we can gain in the game, so stacking them over time just serves to make us even more broken as we scale up throughout the game. Many of the effects repeat, as we can see from the various boosts to skill progression we get from resting, sleeping in our home, sleeping where our spouse is, and so on. These effects are clear-cut for why they would be helpful in different ways, so there's not much to analyze besides some of the effects being unique, and others being a simple boost to stats or skills. The bonus skill point from reading books, a chance to duplicate potions, spawning a fireworm, and a few others offer more unique bonuses that underscore the simplicity of many of the other ones. At the end of the day, most of these just give a minor buff to a stat, skill, or for progression, so we have a similar divide between the more interesting effects versus the basic ones we can get easily. Granted, it makes sense to make more interesting effects and lock them behind quests, but some of them are so niche that some players will skip over them due to better effects being offered per our choice from a set of bonuses, like from black books. As we see consistently across the game, several effects are useful, but you can tell when the developers were going for quantity over quality when it comes to creating unique effects versus basic boosts we can get through a myriad of other means. It becomes blatantly obvious when they needed a buff and just went, I guess a 10% boost to bartering is good enough, then moved on without a second thought. Granted, making a game of this scale with unique abilities all the time would take an incredible amount of work, but it's not impossible, and the buffs and abilities here show the developers had good and bad days when it came to creating bonus buffs and abilities that are interesting for us to use. Now let's get into our inventory and item management, along with some other minor points regarding both. We'll start with carry weight and looting. Carry weight is how much we can hold before being encumbered. When we are encumbered, we can't run, sprint, or fast travel unless we have a horse handy. Even then, we need to be outside or in specific areas, and the horse needs to live for this to work, so only a few horses that are almost invulnerable or respawnable will be consistently helpful, like Shadowmere or Arvak. There are various ways to work around being encumbered ourselves. We can spam Whirlwind Sprint to get around, we can do melee attacks and cancel them halfway through to lurch forward repeatedly, we can drink a potion that increases our carry weight for a limited time, we can dump our excess items on the ground until we get under our max carry weight, we can dump items into an NPC wherewith, like a follower, a corpse mule, or one of the Dremora spawns we can unlock. We can also go through potions, scrolls, and food to lighten the load, as well as craft specific items like potions or smithing supplies to get rid of ingredients and ore, or we can disenchant whole items to drastically decrease our carry weight. If you want to keep everything, be prepared for a long walk to the nearest vendor or house. Carry weight itself can be upgraded depending on our basic stamina stat upgrades, or through special buffs and skills. Every level we put into stamina, we get an extra 5 carry weight that is permanent. We can also gain a 100 point bonus from both the Extra Pockets perk in the Pickpocket tree and the Steed Stone. This alone can net us 500 carry weight without us needing to level stamina at all. We can also buff our weight limit through enchanting items with carry weight. With the right perks, we can make our gear weigh nothing while they also give us carry weight boosts, so the max weight we can carry without leveling stamina can be quite high. We spawn with a flat number of 300 carry weight, and that will usually be enough to do what we need to do throughout the game. It's only when we become loot fiends that we'll need the extra weight to hold every single item we hoard in our inventory to use later or sell. This is where some options come up for dealing with this loot. Followers have varied carry weight we can use to hold extra stuff, but we need to be careful they don't use up ammo, ingredients, scrolls, food, or potions. Some of them do and some don't, so it comes down to how much you know about your pack mule. We also have the option to store things in containers, although some aren't secure, so the loot may disappear from containers outside of our homes. Storing supplies you want to keep but don't need for an adventure can help increase your available carry weight and keep your inventory organized when it comes time to loot everything in sight. We also have the capabilities to summon a Dremora merchant we can sell things to. This makes traversing the world much easier, as we can buy and sell on the go without having to return to a merchant in a city to unload the junk repeatedly. When it comes to the loot and whether to hold onto it or toss it, the major decision is item weight versus value. Some items inherently have a low value to weight ratio, particularly low-level two-handed weapons and armor that aren't enchanted. This scales up as we go through each tier of gear, but the heavier the item, the more the value tends to drop due to the excessive weight heavy weapons and armor can have. By contrast, many potions, rings, necklaces, mage gear, and gemstones often weigh less than or around a single weight unit and can be sold for several dozen or hundreds of gold depending on what bonuses they have. This ratio isn't the final solution to every weight issue, as a player may favor resources for skills, like ingredients, enchanted gear, ores, and pelts, over jewels, scrolls, food, and regular gear. Once you have enough gold to do what you want, you only need to focus on the items that you can use for skills at that point. It also comes down to what build the player is using, and how that impacts carry weight, which has a domino effect in deciding what loot to keep, and how your stats affect this. For example, if you are a warrior type but don't have the weightless armor perk for your heavy armor, your carry weight will be important because all the heavy armor and weapons add up, potentially taking up 100 points of weight on their own, if not more. On the reverse end, mage gear is typically extremely light, and they often only keep one weapon on them, if any at all, so their carry weight limit will be much higher due to their lack of real armor and weapons. However, they also have no real reason to upgrade stamina as a stat, so they may have a static weight of 300 for a while, whereas the warrior may gradually level up stamina and carry weight along with it. Thieves stand the most to gain out of carry weight, as their armor is typically light to weightless depending on light armor perk progression, and they often steal things and sneak around, so stamina will be their primary stat to boost up for obvious reasons. The way the stats and builds play into carry weight works really well at layering the choices when choosing what build to go with, what stats to increase, how that affects managing our loot, and when certain actions should be taken to help us loot stuff more efficiently. Inventory and item management are also affected by the way items scale up and how the hierarchy of items and their weight coincide with each other. For example, armor and weapons tend to get heavier as we go higher in their tiers, with iron swords being significantly lighter than Daedric ones. The Iron Sword is 9 weight units, while the Daedric Sword is 16. The Iron Sword's damage is also 7, while the Daedric Sword is 14 at the baseline. That almost doubles the weight of the weapon, but actually doubles the damage dealt. The item value also shifts from 25 gold for the Iron Sword up to 1,250 gold for the Daedric Sword. As you can imagine, the higher gear may weigh more, but also tends to be more valuable on a weight to value ratio, a weight to damage ratio, or a weight to armor ratio. In short, some of the heavier gear may be more valuable at certain points, but it isn't consistent, so doing a quick number crunch can help figure out what's worth keeping. Generally speaking, light armor will be worth more than heavy armor by virtue of its weight to value ratio, with exceptions typically being unique items with enchantments. Then we have to do the math over again. The item tier discussion applies to inventory management because we have to consider what tier of gear we have, what tier we're working towards, and how to use resources wisely. A key example of this is choosing what potions to use during a fight. Yes, you may need 100 magicka in a pinch, and have a potion that restores that exact amount, but you also have 4 25 magicka potions, which weigh the same as the 100 magicka potion each. This simple scenario comes up a lot when dealing with restoring stats during a fight, as we can have multiple potions that heal for varying values, but weigh similar or identical amounts. This leads into our choices for using up weaker potions to lower our weight, while holding on to stronger ones for greater emergencies. This scenario applies to other types of gear in different ways. It might be better for us to switch from our two-handed weapon of choice to a stronger one-handed weapon, as it's got a strong enchantment. It might be better for us to switch chest pieces for a lower armor value if the enchant is better for sniping from a distance. It might be better to hold a staff in one hand while chucking spells, or it might be better to have a regular melee weapon with a utility effect on it, like Soul Trap or a Drain effect. We also have to manage our gear in terms of what to put in our favorite category. This is reserved for items we deem valuable and probably want to switch back to often, like switching between different weapons and spell combos. This helps to create a micro-inventory that we can use consistently and efficiently. This will typically be where our powers, spells, weapons, and potions of choice will be. This makes them easy to access in a pinch and allows us to keep handy tools available without having to open our entire menu just to reach a health potion. Getting back to the tiers of gear in general, these options coming from the gear we find keep our builds and setups in a constant state of flux as we shift from one item to the next while building up our arsenal. We have to constantly consider how changing gear will affect our movesets, item weight, abilities, and strategies dependent on our preferred playstyle and how we want that to blend with our gear of choice. Granted, this does taper off as we get into the higher ranges of items, where things slowly shift to having a greater chance of being worse than our gear, and as we acquire more resources in general. This means we slowly start changing our build less often as we progress past the midpoint of gear progression, with the only exceptions being unique items we get through questlines, and we don't need to move things around once we've unlocked the strongest items of their categories, like the beefy potions and ammo types. The inventory system in general is well organized in a simple way, with our favorites sectioned off for ease of access, general categories being clear, and the various items we find being organized accordingly. There are a few items that seem to be in the wrong place, namely shields, as we hold them like a weapon and they can be used as a weapon, so I find it strange that they are counted in the apparel tab, not the weapon tab. Maybe it's because they count as armor? I don't know for sure, it's just a strange thing to see. Besides that, the inventory system is very clear and easy to use, making item management that much simpler when we need to organize our gear, use potions during battle, organize our stockpile at home, or when preparing to sell junk. All in all, very simple and very effective for what it needs to do. Now let's go over followers more specifically, because there are some significant points to be made about our buds and gals in the field. The pros of having a follower include the obvious support in combat, but they also serve as distractions, additional inventory space, and they have some utility functions, like picking locks and chopping wood without being encumbered. That last one is just magical if you know what you're doing. They can also be advantageous based on the follower being a trainer of some kind, and some of them being considered essential. This can aid in whatever build we're using when we have a trainer right there with us in the field, but we'll go over that more in a moment. It also helps if they'll keep getting up after taking a knee instead of dying like a pleb. Followers acting as backup in the field for combat, luggage management, and for utility purposes make them quite useful depending on our build and who they are. For example, Faendal is an early game archer trainer that we can use to get our archery skill up quickly, and we can go around sniping together. Farkas is a master heavy armor trainer, which can be incredibly helpful to have as a follower over the course of leveling up heavy armor. This expands to any of the other master level trainers among the follower variety. Followers can aid the player in dealing with tough enemies and encounters, as well as ease the burden of exploring with the extra target for enemies to observe, or act as our pack mule for goodies. The customization of their gear also helps, as certain followers can be equipped with preferred gear to use in the field, making them stronger, although it's inconsistent that they'll use the highest upgraded version of a particular weapon or armor. This can lead to issues depending on the follower and what preferences they have regarding weapons, spells, and armor of choice. When it works, it's great. When it doesn't, you just give a bunch of gear to an NPC that's too stupid to use it. When we get to the negatives of followers specifically, they have some serious issues to counterbalance the advantages. One major problem is that they take away from skills we could potentially get, since they will fight with us and soak up skill points for taking and dealing damage that we could have had. Another issue is that some of them are not essential, so they can die. This means we can have a follower until the game throws something random at us and our friend dies. Yeah, we can reload and try to avoid losing them, but that just undoes what the game can do on its own anyway. A minor issue with followers is that they can hinder us due to their very presence. Having followers when trying to sneak or rob a place can create issues when they don't do exactly what they need to in order to avoid detection. This also extends to them getting in the way sometimes, either in combat or even when moving around. We've all been there where we go loot something and then try to go back down a pathway that our friend is kindly blocking just to annoy us. When they get in the way of combat, it gets even worse, as they can sometimes be killed by us just because they rush in at the wrong time. Again, reloading fixes this issue for the moment, but it's still a serious problem with followers getting in the way of certain things. Then there is the matter of exploiting followers. One example I already mentioned was getting a trainer follower. We can train and then loot the gold back that we used to train in the first place. We can also abuse them for skill ups until they leave our service. Then we bring them back and start the beatings once again, leading to easy skill farming through either of these means. Followers become slaves after a while as we lower them to storage containers or skill providers once we have enough resources to do what we want. Followers have many dimensions where they can be helpful, harmful, or straight broken. This is one reason why I tend to avoid using them in the field. They simply get in the way too much, and I'd rather maximize multiple skill ups instead of boosting one from a trainer while I fiddle with their inventory constantly. They can absolutely be a blessing in the right hands, but they have an equal chance to become problematic mechanically or for balancing sake. They are a mixed bag through and through, and things usually depend on how much carry weight they have and what skills they may have or can train us in. They tend to devolve into storage bins and skill slaves, and that's mainly due to their wonkiness in combat and when engaging with the environment. How many times have you seen a follower get smacked by a trap? It's pretty funny, but scrapes the tip of the iceberg as it relates to their issues. Now let's go over RPG elements and how choice affects the game. We'll start with some basic elements, like deciding who Camilla gets with. If we help Sven, we get a bard buddy, and if we help Faendal, we get an archer and trainer buddy. This simple choice becomes one-sided the more you engage with it. Faendal is obviously a better pick for mechanical reasons, so he tends to be the one that wins on repeat playthroughs. Another example is when choosing to side with Ralof or Hadvar in Helgen. Ralof allows us to cozy up to his family of mill workers. Hadvar allows us to cozy up to a family with a blacksmith in it. Because of this, siding with Hadvar allows us to take some of the gear around Alvor's forge, including several ingots we can use for smithing. This is another split where we have a blatant advantage to picking one side over the other. A third example is during Clavica's Vials quest, where we choose to kill Barbas to keep the rueful axe, or we give it up to get Vials' mask. Killing Barbas lets us keep the axe, but it won't count toward getting the achievement for 15 Daedric items obtained, and the axe isn't that great when compared to Vials' headpiece, which has very high speech bonuses versus the axe's stamina damage. A fourth example is when we have the option to give Harkon Ariel's bow during the finale of the Dawnguard questline. All this does is prevent us from using it during the battle, as he will have it on his corpse once defeated, and he'll attack us whether we give it to him or not. The choice simply doesn't affect anything besides us not having a unique weapon the questline wants us to use given its unique effectiveness against vampires. Giving it to him is simply a stupid option, so we'll never do it unless we want the extra dialogue. I could go on, but I think you get the point by now. These choices that have clear advantages tied to one option, or clear disadvantages tied to another, hurt the choice element on subsequent playthroughs once you've seen both sides of these quests. The choices devolve into a simple, this option is better for me, so I'm always going with this. This diminishes the RPG elements as the choice is outmoded unless we don't have the advantages one side has over the other. We have the choice to do something objectively good for us or objectively bad, and those kinds of choices are just busy work on subsequent playthroughs once we realize how one-sided these choices can be. Choices in RPGs should go hand in hand, as the choices we make should affect role-playing. If we play a game that gives us choices, but we're forced toward the same outcome or the options are clearly one-sided, we've got a problem. Not all choices in Skyrim are as one-sided as the examples I listed, but there are a significant number of them where the choice is either stupidly one-sided or doesn't ultimately matter, and that undermines where role-playing games really shine. If we have the option to pick one of three classes, but Class A and B have nowhere near the overpowered mechanics of C, that last option becomes a major choice because of how broken it is to pick between clear advantages and disadvantages. The choice should come down to the pros and cons, and how they each could work for one type of build or character versus another, not if one option is clearly helpful and the other isn't at all, or if neither option matters at the end of the day. While this criticism stands for some of Skyrim's content, it isn't all it has to offer on the choice front. The Civil War content is largely copied and pasted from each other, but the end result does change things about the world and how some things play out as far as quests and options go. This also bleeds into Season Unending as we reshape the battle lines during the negotiations, but that largely affects the Civil War content specifically until we pick a side and finish the job. We also see this having a meaningful differentiation during Ill-Met by Moonlight when we choose to kill or spare Sinding. The rewards are split between a nice set of armor or a ring that helps werewolves with more transformations. Both count toward the achievement for Daedric artifacts, both are useful depending on build, and both are meaningful in the story, making this one of the best examples of what types of choices should have been implemented across the game, as this affects the story and mechanics in meaningful ways across both options. We also have other choice elements in terms of deciding what to do and when. This impacts the way we interact with the world for obvious reasons. If we start robbing everyone in sight or murdering people, we'll be chased down with a large bounty on our heads. If we choose to help the citizens of different holds, we may become a Thane with special say to make guards back off as well as allowing us to purchase property. Some questlines are also affected by how our choices play into them. Choosing a side during the Dawnguard quest chain requires us to side fully with one side over the other, similar to the Civil War chains. Unlike those chains, we get a myriad of side quests that are unique to that faction, and provide bonuses given what we are to that faction, whether a vampire hunter or vampire lord. This comes with boosts to our ranged weapons on the Dawnguard side, and boosts to our vampire abilities on the vampire side. We also have some unique quests like A Night to Remember, where we have several options available for getting out of sticky situations we find ourselves in. We can deal with the problems we created directly, we can persuade our way out of it, we can pay off the damages, and we can mix and match these options as we go through it for additional context each playthrough. As it relates to the narrative of quests, the choice options are a mixed bag where we'll sometimes get meaningful options with differing rewards of relatively equal value dependent on build and desire. On the other hand, we have several choices that lead to the same end result with minor changes, or the choices are so one-sided to be seen as less as choices and more like, can I pick the correct option for extra goodies? As it stands now, this is the biggest mixed bag in terms of the times we'll have options that matter versus options that don't when it relates to stories and outcomes. When it comes to the general choices relating to mechanics, the game opens up massively as we progress. With the myriad of skills we can pick from, and the intense build customization because of the classless system to leveling, our options for how we want to tackle the game on a mechanical level is open 95% of the time for us to do as we please. This affects how and when we progress quest lines, as well as how effective we are in them, but the options are always there to shake up what we're doing in a meaningful way, depending on our build choices and mood at the time. This speaks to one of the greatest aspects of Skyrim as a whole, the freedom to do what we want, when we want to. While this isn't always the case due to different factors like essential NPCs, limited options during quest lines, scripted sequences, and general railroading as far as progressing stories, we always have the options to tackle several of the encounters as we see fit. With words or violence, honor or ruthlessness, sword or magic, we have the ultimate say in how we fight and engage with the different scenarios we find ourselves in across the game. This makes each playthrough different as we spread our build choices across differing skill sets relating to using magic, sneak, ranged weapons, melee weapons, persuasion, and so on. These options allow for an extremely high playtime for the game, whether during a single run where we try out every option and level up every skill, or through multiple playthroughs to see the ins and outs of different quest lines and the options they contain. These options and choices compound with the sheer amount of content within the game as well. See the walkthrough section for context of just how much we can engage with, let alone the stuff I didn't cover, and the different options available across most of these encounters. The RPG and choice elements of the game may be lackluster and straightforward during much of the narrative side of things, but mechanically, the game gives us options all over the place. As I said before, one of Skyrim's greatest aspects is the freedom to do what we want when we want to do it. This freedom gives the game massive replay value as we experiment with different builds and different questlines at different points of progression. The choice is always there to tackle things in different ways, at least during general playtime, so most of the game retains that fun element of compounding decisions that lead us to do X thing and Y scenario based entirely on our build and mood. What sections that don't allow for meaningful choices are usually relegated to the story sections, as several of those choices can be lackluster, clearly one-sided, or outright meaningless. This also affects mechanics and rewards specifically. Just think back to my points about Sven versus Faendal, and the clear advantages of siding with one over the other. This is where the game falters significantly, as the role-playing grinds to a halt when our choices don't mean anything, or are basically made for us by virtue of the game giving a great option versus a terrible one. While we have incredible freedom during the basic gameplay, the game does fail to give many meaningful options during the stories it tells. It often only gives 2 options to pick from, and the choices don't matter much besides NPCs living or dying most of the time, or we pick one side of 2 to join with, but the questline usually remains on rails for 99% of their content until the very end. Yes, some choices change the face of the world, like the Civil War choice to side with the Imperials or Stormcloaks, but others hardly matter at all besides deciding how we want our loot to play out. Just look at the Black Star, where we get an infinite soul gem, and the choice is all about what type of souls we get. Skyrim has a weird split between the way the RPG and choice elements affect the stories and the mechanics. For the stories, most of them are on rails and only have one major choice to make near the beginning or ending, usually deciding what side we're on and extra rewards we may get by the end. It doesn't expand far beyond that, and it's incredibly lackluster when our choices are so minimal during the stories we find ourselves in. When it comes to mechanics specifically, we have tons of options to deal with various scenarios as we please. The only issues come from scripted encounters during questlines that are on rails most of the time anyway. In a roundabout way, the questlines hold back the actual role-playing because our role has already been defined through the majority of the stories written in the game. When the stories lapse and we're left to fend for ourselves in combat, or when bartering or farming resources, the game suddenly opens up again while we play the game as we wish. Then it railroads back to linear progression of events for the majority of the stories told. As I said, the divide between the way the choice elements affect the stories and mechanics is so wide that you can reasonably separate them out when playing the game. You essentially screw around with the encounters of the game with tons of options until you hit the interaction wall of dialogue. Then we get through it all in a largely linear fashion and go back to the fun choices where we decide to decapitate enemies or roast them alive. It's this constant back and forth between having many options and then 2 to 0 options. This drags down the entire function of choice in the game, as the meaningful choices tend to encompass the minor things we do in the game, like combat and choosing when to progress with whatever, whereas the major events are largely set in stone. Again, this divide between the stories and mechanics creates a major disconnect when going through questlines. It devolves into players spamming dialogue because they know where the 2 choices of consequence actually are, and they already know the best ones to make. Players do this consistently since the choices during the stories are so limited by comparison to the options available when dealing with everything other than the questlines themselves. Now let's discuss the core gameplay loop of Skyrim. The core loop of the game is explore, interact, loot, and repeat. This functions throughout most of the game and is a reasonably good loop to have in a game like this because of the options available throughout the game for exploration, interactions, and loot. As you can see from the previous 12 videos, this game has a lot to offer in terms of content to engage with, making this loop an extended one given the hundreds of hours it takes to fully play the game in every facet available. Granted, not all of these options are 10 septims out of 10, but they are gratifying most of the time, and will often let us enjoy our choice builds thoroughly as we progress different quest lines or just explore the world. There's so much content here to engage with outside of the major quest lines, and we can be left to wander for hours as we engage in different scenarios across the world. We can have a convincing game to have a farmer help a jester. We can retrieve some items for a forgetful mage. We can return a golden claw to its rightful owner. We can wait for a dig to finish while the diggers slowly get picked off. Or we can just run around until we find a crypt and look inside. Unless it's quest specific, we'll usually be able to explore it as we see fit until we grab all the loot and leave, just to repeat this process with the next place we find. The gameplay loop repeats in engaging ways because the interactions can vary between deep quest lines with lots to do, simple quests with minor goals, or they can just be locations to loot and defeat enemies within. In any case, we explore, interact, loot, and repeat. It's not the greatest gameplay loop and is remarkably basic when you get down to it, but it works extremely well given the breadth of content we can engage with and the variability of where we go and when we engage with different pieces of content specifically. Now let's talk balancing. After all the points I've made so far across the various videos in this series, you should be able to tell that Skyrim is amazingly imbalanced. Exploits are everywhere. There are tons of ways the game can spike up or down in difficulty, and we can see how incredibly deep or shallow some systems can be when engaging with them. This game is blatantly broken when it comes to different mechanical options, even if we look outside of glitches. There are a few chests in the game that give extremely helpful loot for free and will respawn after a while, giving us overpowered gear early if the drop is what we want. Grinding, enchanting, and smithing are blatantly broken when combined. Magic is incredibly overpowered, especially when using destruction magic. Several choices in the game either don't affect anything or have one option that is clearly better than the other. Some of the ways we can get out of crime are blatantly broken, as the cost of the crime can end up being less than the additional options we can pick from. Pickpocketing gold back from trainers, through good luck or quick save spamming, breaks the training system. Attacking followers that can't leave us lets us grind skills that normally require more time and exploration. Casting passive spells repeatedly, then waiting, then repeating this loop causes certain skills to boost incredibly quickly by comparison to others, netting levels and skill points for nothing but time. I could go on, but I hope you get the point. Skyrim just isn't balanced, even with some of the things the developers added to try to balance things, like level scaling. They tried, but it still doesn't fix how broken so many systems are. Granted, these broken systems can be incredibly fun to exploit, especially in a single-player game, and I enjoy a good number of these exploits when playing. However, it doesn't help a game that desperately needed rebalancing across the way the skills, abilities, options, and choices affect each other, and how the game can break down once you notice the way certain options become outmoded due to player knowledge and the broken systems they're tied to. Yes, the imbalanced nature of Skyrim can be fun, but it also breaks other mechanics within the game at the same time. Now let's get to a quick overview of the mechanics in general. But first, I will acknowledge that I skipped over some minor mechanics, but most of these are simple mechanics like the wait system progressing time sequentially, fast travel requiring us to be outside, and other minor mechanics that just perform a simple function that isn't really worth mentioning more specifically beyond a single sentence. Just wanted to clear that up here before we move on. Getting to the overview itself, the mechanics of Skyrim give players a ton of options to perform various actions across the game's encounters in many different ways. Most of the time. Some of these are balanced and dynamic, others are broken and stupidly overpowered, and others still are underutilized and simply wasted potential. Skyrim's mechanics are a massive mixed bag depending on where you stand when it comes to balancing versus fun, and depth versus width. There are several exploits that we can use to easily boost different aspects of our character or resources in the game. There are varied levels of options as it relates to quests and choices we can make, some being more dynamic than others by a significant margin. Some options are simply pointless and ultimately don't need to exist, while others are balanced and have weight to the choice itself, both mechanically and narratively. Some mechanics offer deeper layers of strategy than others, and cause some skills and abilities to become incredibly underwhelming when we compare them. In short, Skyrim gives us tons of options for how to do basic things like fighting, bartering, persuading, stealing, exploring, or looting, but more complex things like the choices available are largely binary at best during quests, and usually have very minor changes to whatever we're dealing with, if the choice matters at all. As I said earlier, Skyrim's mechanics are a massive mixed bag, and that can lead to issues depending on who you are and how you like to play your games, especially how you like to play your role-playing games that offer choices for builds and actions to take throughout the experience. Let me know in the comments what your opinions are regarding the game's mechanics, as I'm sure there are several of you who prefer other games' mechanics when compared to Skyrim's. I look forward to seeing the different game and mechanic comparisons, as it really shows what Skyrim did right or wrong by comparison to its peers at the time. Should be interesting to see, but now we'll be moving on.